Chapter 252. What happens in the next 2 days is within Li Shan's expectation. Just like the demons in Dongting don't care about the Ao King, the demons around Dongting also don't care about the wishes of Wei River Dragon King. Many demons have occupied Weishui River for hundreds of years. During these hundreds of years, the 9th young master has never caused any trouble. Now he suddenly wants to make trouble as if he is a leader. Who cares about him? Demons are more concerned about their own affairs. Compared with T like the war between monsters and Taoists, the world's catastrophe, and destroying them one by one, they are more concerned about whether their territory will be targeted, whether their position is secure, where they can catch people to eat, and whether there are disciples of Daotong walking around nearby. They hope they can get out of here as soon as possible so that they can continue to have fun. The section of Weishui River near the city of Wei used to be under the actual control of the 9th young master. Beyond that is the territory of demons. The area that the fiendish demons controlled was far larger than anyone could imagine. Hunters who often enter the mountain know that a pack of wolves' hunting ground may be as vast as dozens of miles, let alone demons. After all, this world is vast and sparsely populated. Most of the wilderness is actually under the name of a monster king. After all, demon kings only had jurisdiction over a certain territory in name. They would never be so arrogant as to run to a large human city in their territory and declare their ownership. But it also means one thing: very few demons know that Wei River Dragon King is not the former Wei River Dragon King. That day, Li Yunxin made a magical scene over the city of Wei, which can be seen from dozens of miles away. But the problem is, the monster king closest to the city of Wei is also hundreds of miles away. This monster is a big demon with the highest personal ability except for the Lord Dongting in the city of Wei River. No one knows what his real body is, but he calls himself Evil King. He has a rare magic weapon called True Eye in his hand. The old monster Evil King has been cultivating for more than 2,000 years. Before the divine dragon gave Weishui River to his 9th son Changwen, he had already occupied this place. This was the end of the wilderness forest outside the city of Wei, where the terrain suddenly rose. There were many mountain peaks in the surroundings, but there was very little vegetation. Most of them were rough desert and bluish stone mountains. Up to this point, the Wei River had made 6 or 7 turns. The river narrowed and the current flowed even more rapidly. This kind of place was inconvenient to transport by water, and the mountain roads were difficult to traverse, so there were very few people. There was only one small city within a radius of a few hundred miles, and it was called Definition City. This city was the westernmost border city of the Daqing State's Wei River Prefecture. Because of this unique condition, even the people of Daotong were not willing to pay attention to this monster. Firstly, his cultivation was profound and he was in the mysterious state of Shi. Secondly, there weren't many people here. As long as this demon didn't eat all the people in the city, who would be willing to go to war for him? In truth, when Kuan Wuzi and the others came to Weiqing City, they only moved around the periphery of the city because they were afraid of the Evil King. When Wei River was assigned to the 9th young master in name, Evil King didn't care at all. He was a great monster in the real state. If there was anything that he was afraid of, it would be Shinryu. Other people, such as Dragon's Son, came to his territory to fight with him. What could they gain? Fortunately, the 9th young master was tactful. He didn't dare to come and look for trouble and only stayed near the city of Wei. Evil King knew that it was because there was a more terrifying monster, Lord Dongting, in Dongting. Even the place where Dragon's Son was staying was surrounded by strong enemies, not to mention something that was hundreds of miles away. Therefore, when he got the message from the Dongting water tribe sent by Li Yunxin, Evil King laughed and tore the messenger into pieces. Then he said to the demon general beside him, "What a good Wei River Dragon King, he. For the sake of Shinryu, we showed him some respect and didn't make things difficult for him. But he wanted to command the heroes. Why are you saying such senseless things?" He frowned and looked at a piece of fish skin in his hand as he said, "That fish skin was carried by every little monster who came to deliver the message. There was a letter written by Li Yunxin on it. He did this to prevent the little monster from speaking clearly, so that the monster kings could read it. But in this era there were not many people who could read, let alone the monster kings. Evil King had lived for a long time, so he wanted to learn some human knowledge for a while. That was why he could read it and read it clearly. If the lips die, the teeth will be cold, and fortune and misfortune depend on each other. Well." Evil King frowned and looked at Li Yunxin's words. He sighed after a glance as if every word stabbed his heart and made him unhappy. "It's all bullsh*t. We have been operating in Stone Forest Mountain and Juku Gorge for 2,000 years. Who dared to come here?" Even the Taoist priests of Daotong and the swordsmen of Kenzo had to land and leave when they flew over my territory. No one dared to disrespect me. I think it was Long Jiao who provoked the people of Daotong. Now he wants to get us involved in this mess. There were monster generals around the evil king, and there were also monster generals around Li Shan in the past. But evil king was a big monster who had just reached the Xian realm. How could those stupid monster generals around Li Shan compare to him? At this moment, the person talking to him was a woman who called herself Qi Duanjin. She had been cultivating for more than 600 years, and now she was at the peak of the transcendent realm. Her real body was a colorful poisonous snake. Qi Duanjin thought for a while and read the fish skin letter in Evil King's hand again. She frowned and said, "Your Majesty, Long Jiao said that now the Lord Dongting is not here, and Daotong is going to plot the dragon's soul. This might not be fake. Your Majesty, how many years has the old monster of Dongting guarded that place? But who has seen him leave Dongting? Why did he go there now?" Although Evil King had lived for a long time, he still paid attention to Qi Duanjin's words. He frowned and pondered for a while. He glanced at her and said, "What you said makes sense. In your opinion, what should we do?" Qi Duanjin stood up and said seriously, "In my opinion, we can't take this matter lightly. Even if you don't care, we can't guarantee that other monster kings won't make mistakes. Why don't you gather them together and listen to what they have to say before you make a decision?" When Qi Duanjin was talking, Evil King stared at her. When she finished, Evil King clapped his hands and said, "Good. You've thought it through. Send an order for my 7 sons to come here, and we'll have a good discussion." Evil King's 7 sons were actually his adopted sons. They used to be the 7 big monsters who lived near Stone Forest Mountain and Juku Gorge where Evil King lived. But at that time there were not 7 monster kings, but 7 monster generals who served a big monster together. Later, Evil King spent a lot of effort to kill that big monster. Then he assigned his 7 sons to guard the territory near his own territory. As such, firstly, it could serve as a buffer between him and the other great fiendish demons. Secondly, the heretic king admired the demeanor of the true dragon conferring his 9 sons. He felt that it was the style of a divine dragon. Thirdly, Evil King could be regarded as an unusual kind of monster. And he was unusual in his love of talent. Most ordinary monsters were violent by nature. When they saw a powerful monster around them, they would kill them to prevent them from threatening their position in the future. But Evil King was different. He had subdued a lot of monsters over the years, but he rarely killed them. If they said they would surrender to him, he would spare their lives and let them be a monster general under him. In this way he had a lot of high-level monsters under him, and they also had to sacrifice their lives. But he was also someone who liked to listen to advice and follow good advice. Just like what Qi Duanjin said today. As long as he felt that it was reasonable, he would not be obstinate. Snake Spirit Qi Duanjin also knew his Evil King's background. He immediately accepted the order and went to summon the 7 sons. This Evil King's nest was on the tallest mountain in Stone Forest Mountain. Rather than calling it a mountain, it was more like a stone pillar. The stone pillar that seemed to pierce through the sky was abnormally steep, and there was almost no vegetation on its surface. Not to mention humans, even monkeys that were good at climbing couldn't reach the peak. Birds could fly over it. But if someone really flew over, they would definitely be captured and eaten by the monsters on the mountain. This stone mountain was a few hundred meters tall and a few dozen meters wide. The mountain was almost hollowed out. From afar, it looked like a beehive. There were many holes one after another, and the whole mountain was hollowed out. The Diablo and the 200 demons under him lived in this lair. This nest also had a name. It was called Pitfall Mountain. Qi Duanjin naturally went to summon the 7 sons. But she also selected a lot of little fiendish demons and asked them to bring the token of Pitfall Mountain to the other little monster kings. Li Yunxin sent 200 to 300 demons to deliver the letter, but more than half of them had already run away. The remaining 100 or so people couldn't walk safely. Some of the demons were bloodthirsty. When they saw their own kind, they didn't care about their identity or background. They would kill and eat them without any explanation. As a result, there were only a few dozen people who could really receive the letter. But all of this was already expected. Those who could respond to this information were all reasonable. Those who couldn't receive the letter were mostly little fiendish demons with low cultivation, and they were of no use. Now that Qi Duanjin also sent people to deliver the letter, it was to gather all the little monster kings who received Li Yunxin's letter, to prevent anyone from running away to meet up with Long Jiao. Evil King's reputation here was far above Long Jiao's. Who dared to disobey him? So Qi Duanjin did something for Li Yunxin. Those little monster kings dared to ignore Long Jiao, but they didn't dare to ignore Evil King. Regardless of whether they knew or not, they all came. 3 days later, the Pitfall Mountain gathered all the little monster kings within thousands of miles from the city of Wei to the Juku Gorge, a total of 150 people. If you looked at it on the map, that section of Wei River looked like a thin line or the stem of a leaf. And the territories ruled by these little monster kings overlapped and formed a huge leaf. It included 5 to 6 prefectures near the city of Wei, which was almost a quarter of the area of the Daqing state. If the demons also had a history book, this was indeed a big event worthy of being recorded in the history books. Chapter 253. In the past few days, Dongting is not peaceful either. However, the turbulence near the Pitting Mountain is not peaceful. In the Dongting there are undercurrents. At first, the Taoists near the city of Wei are busy. But they are not busy dealing with the inhibition of Dongting. Instead, they are busy setting up checkpoints. The checkpoints set up by the Taoists are different from the checkpoints set up by the government in the secular world. The government checkpoints are set up on the road. Only those on the ground are allowed to pass. However, the Taoist checkpoints are set up in the sky. All the passage between the sky and the ground is prohibited. Just like the Taoists in the city of Wei who drew the sun in the sky, many cultivators who have reached the transcendent state and can fly in the sky and write all kinds of spells. These spells have the distinctive characteristics of each cultivator, but they can also cooperate with each other. Thus, a huge three-dimensional restriction that covered the entire space appeared. Although this inhibition is big, it is far from being comparable to the inhibition of Dongting. Even a secular person will only feel a little tightness in the chest when affected by the power of this inhibition. Because this inhibition is not used to restrict people's movement. It is to find a wandering soul. Lin Lizhu and the former Faiyunzi killed Kun Wuzi. However, the cultivators in the advanced mysterious state have some terrible means. Even the Tiangang formation of life and death killed the unprepared Kun Wuzi in an instant with the power of 100,000 ghosts. It seems that there is still a trace of his soul left in him. Of course, he can't let this remnant soul go. This inhibition can't restrain people, but it can be used to find a remnant soul. Kun Wuzi wants to get rid of the trouble as soon as possible to avoid any changes in the future. However, this inhibition is made. He has been looking for it for several days without any result. Kun Wuzi knows that the former Grand Master's realm is unfathomable. However, he was not an ordinary person when he was Faiyunzi. The difference between a Taoist in the true state and a Taoist in the mysterious state can be big or small. Taoists at the peak of the transcendent state can enter the true state and mysterious state. They can practice more powerful spells. This means that the difference between the true state and mysterious state is mostly about the strength of Wakan and the thorough understanding of Taoism. If Li Yunxin explains this, he will say that the true state is a primary school student who doesn't study hard and plays games every day. On the other hand, Mysterious Realm was a primary school student who was attentively listening to the teacher, earnestly revising the lesson, and after the lesson he still had to attend the cram school. But in the end they were just primary school students. Therefore Kun Wuzi roughly knew what kind of method the former leader of the Langya cave abode would use to preserve a trace of his soul. He also knew how fast he could travel in a day and how he could hide. If he didn't know these things, no one would dare to kill a profound realm cultivator of Daotong under the eyes of other cultivators. But he had seen a ghost. He just couldn't find Kun Wuzi's remnant soul. Therefore, the newly promoted sect master of Langya Cave Heaven was temporarily attracted by this matter. At this time, Li Shan was busy paying attention to Li Yunxin's whereabouts. Since he had already decided to do something, he had to control all the details. Unfortunately, the original Li Shan wasn't a trusted follower of Li Yunxin. Therefore, the only thing he could do was to send many water-kind spirit creatures to hide around Mount Jun nominally. They were ready to be summoned at any time. But in fact, they were paying attention to Li Yunxin's whereabouts. They also knew that Li Yunxin had a way to get out of the inhibition of Dongting, but there were also Taoists guarding there. These two brothers were actually using the tactic of numbers. But the problem was, they were guarding the wrong place. Li Yunxin shook his head. He stood in the corridor of the middle hall of Mount Jun. In front of him was the cliff of hundreds of meters and the scenery of Dongting. The mountain wind blew through the corridor. The small copper bells hanging on the eaves rang one after another. It was a bit pleasant. I took those lake monsters out of the inhibition that day. When I arrived in the forest, I didn't unlock their 5 senses. I took them out for more than 10 miles before I released them. Otherwise, it wouldn't take so much time to transport 200 or 300 people out. Li Yunxin stood in the corridor with his hands behind his back and looked at the scenery in the distance. He shook his head again. At that time I thought there might be a problem. Sure enough, there was a problem. Now the people of Daotong are guarding the place where I woke up those demons. They thought I would come out from there. Do you think there is something wrong with some of us? This was said to Lu Laodao. Lu Laodao was also in the corridor. He moved a rattan chair on the back of a jade screen and leaned against it. However, this rattan chair only looked like it was made of rattan. In fact, it was not made of gold or wood. It was obviously a treasure. Laodao liked this chair. He took it with him everywhere these days. Hong Yangzi sometimes laughed at him. He just smiled and said, "It's good to use the things of immortals." He didn't argue with the little girl, although this little girl might be older than his great-grandmother. At this time, Lu Laodao was enjoying the mountain breeze. His thoughts were a little more active. He knew that sometimes when Brother Xian asked him something, it didn't mean that he didn't have a clue. It was just that Brother Xian liked to talk about things with people he could trust. As he talked, he would clear his thoughts. As he talked, he would have an epiphany. So he squinted his eyes, thought for a moment and said, "Brother Xian, didn't you say it before? Look at our Mrs. Sanhua. She is a bit suspicious. That you family's Yu Meng is also a bit suspicious. Our family's Sanhua is not often seen these days. But I know she went to the lake to play. You see, she hides her worries, but she also likes to play. If I had to say, she has the temperament of a child. If I had to suspect something, I wouldn't suspect her. But that you family's young master, you also sent him out. If I had to say, he is also a suspect. And that Li Shan that you subdued. So I don't have a clue." Li Yunxin turned around. There was something in his hand. It was the jade slip of enlightenment. He tossed the jade slip in his hand and laughed at himself. "Actually, I'm afraid of hardship, and I don't like to study. When I was young, I didn't know anything in the mountain village. My parents taught me well, so I learned quickly. Until now. If I didn't get a demon body, I don't know when I could cultivate to the real state. They are all looking for this thing. If they really see it, they will be disappointed. Old Lu, why don't you guess what's in here so far?" Lu Laodao knew that the jade slip in his hand was the jade slip of enlightenment. He also knew from him that the jade slip of enlightenment was a painting treasure and a relic of the saint of painting. After all, he was a painter and now he had become a Taoist painter. So he didn't dare to show any disrespect to the ancestors' things. When Li Yunxin tossed the treasure in his hand, he couldn't help sitting up straight and staring at it. He was afraid that Brother Xian would accidentally break it. He thought for a while and swallowed, "I don't dare to guess, I don't dare to guess." Li Yunxin sighed, "So far, the parts one can see are all about cultivation. But it's better to give me a few secret manuals for me to cultivate. Guess what's the method of transforming the soul into the real body in the truth-telling state? There's only one sentence. You really think it's real? Damn it, who are you fooling?" Lu Laodao's face changed. He thought, "Brother Xian, how dare you scold the ancestor?" But it was not good to say this to Li Yunxin. He could only apologize for Li Yunxin in his heart, afraid that lightning would strike him. Li Yunxin complained. But he still jumped on the railing along the corridor, sat with one leg up, and opened the jade slip of enlightenment. After opening it, he began to mumble and read. In Lu Laodao's eyes, he was talking nonsense. Sometimes it would smile strangely as if it understood what was going on. Sometimes he didn't say anything but just frowned. After frowning for a while, he began to scold people to himself, which made Laodao panic. When Li Yunxin was reading, Lu Laodao kept a lookout for him, not letting others see the jade slip. After a whole afternoon, Li Yunxin stood up and sighed, "Who are you fooling?" Laodao heard him mention the method of transforming the soul into the real body, and knew that he was practicing it. Hearing his unhappy tone, he knew that the progress was not good. So he tried to comfort him. "The method that Brother Xian talked about is not the method that Yunzi used in the city of Wei, right? In the city of Wei, when Li Yunxin pretended to be Dragon Sun Hatred, Yunzi used his doppelganger to come out of the treasure mirror of arcane light and talked with Li Yunxin in detail. Anqing Liangzi, who was killed by Li Yunxin, also mentioned that he had fought with the doppelganger of Li Yunxin's parents thousands of miles away." Li Yunxin nodded. "Yes, it's that thing. People in the real state can do it, they are already Jinren. Their souls can be divided into another self temporarily, which is also the real self. But it is difficult to practice and not everyone can do it. I wanted to do this just now, thinking that I could help, but in the end," Li Yunxin looked at the translucent jade script in disgust. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Laodao was afraid that he would start to scold the Grandmaster again, so he hurriedly comforted him. Don't worry, don't worry. Since it is a difficult method to practice, it is always better to take it slow. Brother Xian has a high comprehension and talent. If 1 day is not enough, 2 days is enough. If 2 days is not enough, 3 days is enough. You will eventually succeed. Hearing this, Li Yunxin blinked his eyes and looked at him strangely. Huh? I have already practiced it. Lao Dao didn't react for a moment and was stunned. In just a moment he heard another Li Yunxin said behind him, "When did you see me practice a method for more than 2 days?" Lao Dao turned his head. It was really another Li Yunxin. Lao Dao was stunned for a while and said in disbelief, "Didn't Brother Xen say, this method is difficult to practice?" Li Yunxin laughed and spread out his hands. "Otherwise, how can I be called a genius?" Lao Dao sighed in his heart, thinking that if you are like this, it is easy to lose friends. After another day, Bai Yunxin came to visit. These days she wandered in the lake with her little maid. Those who knew the inside story all guessed that she was going to take the dragon's soul, but they only thought that she hadn't found where the dragon's soul was. Only Li Yunxin knew that it was because of his previous promise, to ask her to cooperate with him to take the dragon's soul away later, so that he would have time to arrange something. And he would settle the marriage that her adoptive father Rock King planned for her as a reward. Apparently, Li Yunxin had gained some confidence in Bai Yunxin after he had caused a few big events near the city of Wei. She actually did as he said. Li Shan watched Bai Yunxin enter the middle hall of Ziwei Palace in Mount Jun. Then he talked with Li Yunxin for a whole night. On the second day, Li Yunxin and Bai Yunxin still didn't show up. Li Shan was a little anxious. He was afraid that Li Yunxin had gone somewhere else out of the inhibition of Dongting. But when he was anxious, he saw Red Lady coming out of the front hall of Ziwei Palace. Red Lady built a small wooden pavilion beside the white beach of Mount Jun to commemorate the time when she and Li Yunxin first met. Later, this wooden pavilion became her place when she was bored. She was the princess of Dongting and now she should be the ruler of Dongting. However, everyone in Dongting knew that the Lord Dongting didn't care about his daughter very much. He even treated her as an object. And now, a great demon like Li Yunxin had entered Crepe Myrtle Palace. This Red Lady had truly become a figure that no one could see. But today, Li Shan only paid attention to Red Lady. He looked from a distance and saw that this beauty came with wine. When she came to the wooden pavilion, she stared into the distance for a while and then began to drink wine. Then he knew that she was sad again. He also heard some other words that Red Lady said to herself while drinking. Although it was just a few words, Li Shan could infer with his intelligence, it was because of Bai Yunxin. At this moment, Bai Yunxin was still in Ziwei Palace and she was talking happily with Li Yunxin. How could Red Lady tolerate this kind of thing? She couldn't lose her temper in front of the two big demons, so she had to escape and drown her sorrows in wine. Li Shan was a little relieved. Another morning passed like this. Red Lady was drunk and slept in the pavilion. However, Li Yunxin and Bai Yunxin hadn't come out yet. Li Shan was anxious and wanted to find an excuse to break in and report something. But as luck would have it, a good thing actually came knocking on his door. Mrs. Sanhua, who was with Li Yunxin, came back from somewhere. Seeing Li Shan poking his head out from afar in the water, he felt like playing around. She was half a dragon's. Although she was in the emptiness realm, her physical strength was not weaker than Li Shan's. Therefore she jumped into the water and picked Li Shan up. She said that he looked funny and she was very bored in the hall, so she asked him to play with her in the hall. This was exactly what Li Shan wanted. He pretended to say, "This Sanhua is the fairy of the king, so I don't dare to be rash," and followed her into the hall. So, he was finally relieved. When he entered the hall, he saw that Li Yunxin was still sitting opposite Bai Yunxin. However, he didn't kneel according to the ancient custom. Instead, he sat on a comfortable rattan chair. Beside him were Lao Dao and Bai Yunxin's servant girls. The four of them sat around a table and seemed to be playing something. Li Shan watched from afar. Although he did not want to know what they were playing about, he heard Li Yunxin shouting excitedly from time to time, "I knew you were a loyal minister," or crying out in frustration, "Take me away, don't leave me to the traitor," or sighing and saying, "Why am I a traitor again?" As he listened, he became anxious again. Could it be that the four of them sensed that something was wrong and were investigating one by one? Unfortunately, before he could find out, Sanhua dragged him to a corner of the hall and forced him to play with her. The three flowers play wasn't fun at all. They were fighting like cats playing with each other. Li Shan had to play with her carefully, afraid that she would drive him out. He also had to restrain his strength of the peak of the transcendent realm so that he wouldn't hurt her. He didn't have the mood to listen to what Li Yunxin and the others were talking about. As a result, they ended up fooling around for an entire day. It was the first day of the gathering of the demons in the Pitfall Mountain of the Evil King. Chapter 254. The evil king occupied Stone Forest Mountain and Juku Gorge. But in reality his power covered an area of 1,000 li. He was one of the few powerful demons in the Qing kingdom. Thus the rules here were very strict. The various demon kings who came to attend the meeting could not walk into Pitfall Mountain openly. They had to be interrogated before they could be let in. This interrogation was not about anything else, but to verify his true identity, to see if he was a monster king or someone else in disguise. This was not the evil king's idea but Qi Jin's. She was afraid that Daodong's people would sneak in and cause trouble. The thing she used to interrogate was the evil king's eye of truth. Every fiendish demon in the Pitfall Mountain had seen the appearance of the true eye before. Although the evil king could not let every little demon play with it, he did not view it as a forbidden item. This was because the eye of truth was very big and could only be used to distinguish the real from the fake. However, very few people knew the reason why such an item became the evil king's famous enchanted treasure. That day Qi Jin was guarding the only entrance of Pitfall Mountain. She sat on a large tiger skin chair. Dozens of demon soldiers surrounded her, checking the identity of the demon kings one by one. The demon kings came one by one and Qi Jin waited quietly. That day the sky near Stone Forest Mountain was clear. Although it was a barren land with no trees in sight, the wide and rough Gobi Desert gave off a sense of heroism. But both Qi Jin and the little demons around her were tired of seeing this scene. So she sat on the large chair and basked in the sun. The little demons also lay or leaned against her, lazily basking in the sun around her. To people who did not know what was going on, it looked like a young woman with a group of children enjoying the happiness of a family. When the demon king came from afar, the little demons jumped up in high spirits. If it was a big demon it was fine. But if it was a small demon king they would rush up and search him. Although it was a body search it was actually a search. They took everything they wanted and then called Qi Jin for questioning. The small demon kings were afraid of the evil king's power and did not dare to argue with the demon soldiers. They all swallowed their anger. When his body was searched clean he walked in front of Qi. At this time he began to use the true eye to verify his identity. The true eye was very large, at least 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. When it stood up it was taller than a person. It looked like a huge iron plate, but it was indeed an iron plate. The evil king used 2 pieces of iron plates as a shell to wrap up the treasure inside. But there was a small hole in the iron plate, about the size of a thumb, revealing a black dot. Anyone who had a rough understanding of literature would think that the black dot was actually an ink dot. But the eye in the name of the true eye magic treasure referred to this thing. The demon king came in front of Qi Jin and told him to look at the iron plate, the black dot on the iron plate. Then he asked him what he saw. If the answer was correct it would be the real body, and if the answer was wrong it would be a fake. However, a total of 63 demon kings had come today, and no one had impersonated them yet. And it was difficult for those demon kings to realize that this was the famous magic treasure of the evil king, who would casually take out a magic treasure and stick it on the ground. It was not until noon that he saw another person walking over from afar. This person looked like a scholar and he was dressed in white. He walked at the end of the horizon where the heat waves were rising, and his figure became distorted because of the distorted air. Great demon kings brought their demon generals when they came to the meeting, and only the unranked little demon kings came alone. And looking at his attire, it was obvious that he was used to interacting with people. Great demon kings who lived in the mountains and wilderness would not dress like this. They were more wild and rough. This wild and rough included, but was not limited to, using human bones as decoration, being naked and wearing all kinds of oil paint. But for him to dress like this, it meant that he was close to a human town. If he was close and was not killed by a Taoist priest or a swordsman, he was either so strong that the other party could do nothing about it, or he was dutifully a good person. The demon soldiers generally believed that this person belonged to the latter. It also meant that he would have many good things on him. Human things were relatively rare. There was only one defined city near the Stone Forest Mountain. The people and things in that city were enjoyed by the evil king, and they did not have such luck. So they jumped up and rubbed their palms, preparing to plunder some benefits from him. When this person walked closer unhurriedly, 7th Duanjin raised his eyelids and looked at him. But after looking at him he was slightly stunned, then he sat up straight and stared at him carefully. The demon soldiers also saw him clearly and they were all stunned. Because this demon king was really strange, he looked too much like a human. The more powerful a demon was, the more they looked like a human when they turned into a human. This was not very strange. But what was even stranger about this person was that not only did he look like a human, he was also very beautiful. Even in a human town he could be called a real handsome man, right? Among the fiendish demons this was indeed extremely rare. He stepped on the gravel and walked closer, then cupped his hands and smiled at the group of demons. I am here to attend the meeting. Hearing him speak, he actually looked more like a human. The group of demons was stunned by him. After a while, someone asked him angrily, "Which mountain's demon king are you from? How come I have never seen you before?" This beautiful man did not pay attention to the person who spoke, but looked at 7th Duanjin and smiled. I am from the Water Tribe. I used to live near Dongting, and I also have some soldiers under my command. A few days ago I went out because of some matters, but I didn't expect that Dongting would be sealed and I couldn't return home. I heard that the evil king was holding a meeting here, so I came to see if I could get a job. Oh, when I was in Dongting they all called me the romantic jade-faced little silver dragon. Hearing his name, the demon soldiers looked at each other, not knowing what it meant. But 7th Duanjin laughed. Your name is quite appropriate. You really look like a romantic talent. After thinking for a while he said, although you are not the local demon king, your cultivation level is not low. I like you, so I'll let you in. But after entering Pitfall Mountain you can't walk around randomly in case you get caught. This romantic jade-faced little silver dragon quickly clasped his hands in thanks. Thank you, fairy sister. My cultivation level is not high, but I have reached the stage of turning nothingness into reality. I will definitely not disappoint, sister. The demon soldiers originally wanted to charge forward, but seeing the current situation, it was not good to do so. They all knew that 7th Duanjin liked handsome men. But which handsome man they had seen before could compare to this little silver dragon? 7th Duanjin smiled as he received his compliment, then pointed at the large metal plate beside him. Come look at this. This little silver dragon took a few steps closer to take a look, asking curiously, what is this? 7th Duanjin still smiled at him. Come look at the hole on the metal plate. What do you see inside? The person who came found the hole, and his expression became serious. He carefully looked at it for a while. After 5 or 6 breaths of time, he turned his head to look at 7th Duanjin. I see an eye. 7th Duanjin stared at him, asking, what kind of eye? This romantic jade-faced little silver dragon thought for a while, then said, from a rough look, it looks like a cat's eye. But looking at the ferocious expression in its eyes, it doesn't seem like a cat's. If I had to say, it's either a leopard's eye or a tiger's eye. 7th Duanjin smiled again. Good. You're knowledgeable, you can go in. This little silver dragon bowed to 7th Duanjin again, then lifted his feet and walked through the door. The door of the Pitfall Mountain was a stone door, opening at the foot of the mountain. Originally it should have been a cave, but the shape was not neat. Right now there were many human or animal skeletons and skeletons decorating the side of the cave, acting as a facade. After entering the door he first walked through a deep and serene passage. Although it was wide, it was cold and damp, even dripping with water. This was a completely different scene from the dry and hot weather outside. After walking for about 15 minutes he finally saw the light at the end, and heard the sounds in the cave. It was as he had expected. It was a mess and he could not hear anything clearly. Only demons with a higher cultivation could speak the human language. Many demons with low cultivation mostly communicated with each other through body language and primitive howls. But although some demon kings had high cultivation, they were together with a group of small demons. Who could they speak the human language to? Over time they did not like to speak the human language. At this moment he heard such a clamor and also a thick smell of blood. Li Yunxin. He frowned slightly. He had originally thought that the evil king was a great demon like the Lord Dongting, and should be more like a human. Who would have guessed that this would be the scene here? That smell of blood. Although he could not smell whether it was from a human or an animal. But with a group of demons gathered here, the answer was clear. He did not like this kind of banquet. So he gave a low sigh and took 2 more steps forward. Suddenly the view in front of him became clear. What he saw was a hollowed-out mountain. Looking down 10 or so meters below the ground, there was a terrifyingly wide square. Looking up, there was endless darkness. It turned out that the entire mountain was connected in the middle, not like what he had guessed, made up of stone rooms. He was standing on a cliff right now. On both sides were narrow passageways carved out from the stone walls. These passageways were densely packed, crisscrossing as far as his eyes could see. Some of them led underground, some spiraled along the stone walls to higher places. A few doors opened on the stone walls, probably rooms. The hundreds of demons of Pitfall Mountain probably lived in these rooms. The underground square was lit with countless torches. At first glance, It looked bright and glorious. But this golden color was embellished with red. The color was very pleasing to the eye. But this kind of pleasure belonged to the demons, not to any human. Because there was a large pool in the middle of the square and the pool was red. There was no red wine in this world, so it was obvious what the red liquid was. On the southern side of the square, there was a row of large wooden cages, all of which were filled with people. Li Yunxin did a rough count. There were at least 100 of them. Dozens of monster kings came, some of them brought their followers. In addition to the busy lesser demons of Pitfall Mountain, the 200 to 300 demons in the square didn't seem crowded, but it wasn't deserted either. Meanwhile, the little demons of Pitfall Mountain were busy with their work. Some were taking people out of the cages, some were stripping them of their clothes. If they were old, weak, or sick, they were stripped of their clothes, then their heads were cut off and their blood was drained. After the blood was drained, the demons dismembered them, skinned them, and sent them to the western side of the square to be steamed, fried, boiled, or roasted. If they were strong and fat, they were stripped of their clothes as well. But their mouths were gagged, their hands and feet were tied up like pigs and dogs, and sent to the seats of the monster kings. Then they used a stake to make a hole in their necks, hung them up like a wine bag and drank their blood. Dozens of lesser demons were cooking and frying humans. Their screams were endless. But the demons loved the screams, so they didn't have to sing and dance. The other demons who were serving food like a river, or the demon soldiers and generals brought by the demons, lost control when their masters were eating and drinking, so they ran around the square, mostly towards the pile of corpses. There was a huge pile in the southwest of the hall, filled with human bones, internal organs, and intestines. When Li Yunxin saw it, it was already as tall as a small mountain. He didn't even know how many people had been killed. Blood and all kinds of secretions mixed together and flowed everywhere, giving off a strong stench. But the lesser demons loved the smell, so they gathered in groups of 3 to 5. The braver ones would steal the bowls of intestines and eat them until their mouths were full of blood. The cowardly ones would only pick up bones with flesh and blood to satisfy their cravings, but they still chewed them crisply. The lesser demons of Pitfall Mountain would chase them away. But they were not reasonable, and if they fought often, 1 or 2 of them would die. The monster kings didn't care and instead laughed. Li Yunxin stood at the entrance of the cave and stared at the scene for a long time. This was the first time he saw such a scene. He had seen demons eat humans before. He saw the 9th young master eat humans and the Lord Dongting eat humans. But he had never seen so many demons eat so many humans. He wasn't sure what kind of emotion he was feeling, shock, disgust, or fear. He looked down for a moment and noticed 5 more people. Is 5 people. These 5 people were not locked in cages, nor were they tied up, nor were they corpses. They were 5 neatly dressed people sitting around a stone table. The stone table was right below the entrance. If Li Yunxin hadn't taken a few steps forward and looked down, he wouldn't have noticed them. They were dimly lit, and there was a torch inserted into the rock wall from afar. There were many wine jars here, some taller than a person. These wine jars were lined up, and there were nearly 100 of them, forming a wall. Behind the wall were some bags, perhaps containing rice, flour, oil, or other miscellaneous items. And these 5 people were sitting at a table in this pile of miscellaneous items, far away from the demons outside. They were drinking and eating meat. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and stared for a while, expressionless. He saw a small demon carrying a steaming hot pot stumble into the room. It placed the pot at the feet of the 5 people, said something to them, and left again. Li Yunxin knew that the soup in the pot was human flesh and bones, and it seemed that the 5 people knew it too. But they didn't mind it at all. They scooped it out happily, grabbed it with their hands, and ate until their mouths were full of oil. After a few mouthfuls they felt a little tired, so they picked up the bowl and drank some wine before eating again. One of the 5 people was wearing clothes that Li Yunxin had seen 2 people wear before. One was Constable Xing of Qinghe County, and the other was Inspector Yin of Liuhe Prefecture of City of Wei. They wore a square hat with a peacock feather on it. These 5 people were 1 constable and 4 constables. Chapter 255. They're humans, Li Yunxin muttered to himself. He wanted to find a reason to absolve these 5 people, but the thought disappeared in a flash. He had seen too much of the evil in human nature. Most of the time, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't imagine what kind of shocking evil existed in this world. He stared at the 5 people for a while and sighed. At this time he heard a voice that he hadn't heard for a long time. This voice was sharp and there was a hint of mockery in it. Did you sigh because you feel better about the demons? The voice came from the front left. It should be empty space, there was no place to stand. But Li Yunxin didn't rush to look up. He stood there in silence for a while, then looked up. Then he saw Bai Yanjun. This Yama king who had not been seen for a long time, floated in midair. One of his black eyeballs was staring at Li Yunxin, while the other eye was looking at the scene in the hall below. He looked very strange. These 5 people are the officials of a city 30 miles east of the Pitfall Mountain. They've been colluding with the Diablo for a long time. Usually, they send prisoners to the demons regularly, and only say that they died of illness in the prison. The demons also gave them benefits and promised them gold and silver. Now that the Diablo is holding a banquet, he actually ate so many people. These 5 people are quite capable to be able to find them. Bai Yanjun spoke frankly to Li Yunxin as if he was telling a story, but Li Yunxin knew that he was a king of hell. In the legends of mortals, the black and white kings of hell were the righteous deities responsible for good and evil retribution, and the cycle of reincarnation. When good people died, Bai Yanjun would lead them away and reincarnate into a good family. When evil people died, the Black King of Hell would lead them away and send them to hell, but Li Yunxin already knew that it was all bullshit. There was no such thing as good and evil retribution in this world. This Bai Yanjun was still chattering. I see that you're having a good time as a demon now. Seeing this scene again, don't you feel even more disappointed? At catching your own kind and sending them to demons to eat? Demons can't do such a thing. At this point he didn't say anything more. The black eyeball that was looking at the hall suddenly turned back and stared at Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin smiled. None of them were good people. There were villains among men, and demons were no better. Cannibalism was not a common sight, but demons and monsters were quite common. It's just that my sigh was a sigh. I always thought that I was cool enough, but when I saw this scene and these 5 people, I was still shocked. I used to think that priests and swordsmen were heartless because they made themselves inhuman. Even now, if they aren't shocked by the scene before them, then they are indeed smarter than me. Let's not talk about me. Yama-jun has been ignoring me for a long time. Why did he suddenly jump out and look for me? If it wasn't urgent, they could talk about it later. I'm about to make a big scoop. The smile on Bai Yanjun's face gradually faded. His black eyes occupied his entire eye sockets, looking like 2 black holes. He stared at Li Yunxin for a long time before he let out a cold laugh. What's the matter? Hey, you little fellow, you have a lot of skill and a lot of guts. What kind of person's soul do you dare to take it? Li Yunxin was stunned for a moment before he said, Oh, you mean him. At this point, 2 strange-looking demons walked over from the entrance with their arms around each other's shoulders. Li Yunxin kept his mouth shut and stood leaning against the wall. The 2 demons had already smelled blood and were in no mood to pay attention to him. They didn't even bother to look at him and hurriedly jumped down from the cliff. Li Yunxin then said, I'm a civil servant of the underworld after all. There are no benefits and no salary. This time, I'm using my power for personal gain. Why don't you let him go? I'll give him to you after the matter is settled, okay? Bai Yanjun didn't fall for his trick. He glared at him. 2 black eyes occupied half of his face in an instant, making him look like a monster. I love your talent, that's why I put up with you again and again. Don't push your luck. Give him to me now, immediately. Li Yunxin said helplessly, but I still have a use for him. I'm also a judge of the Yang realm and he can't stir up any waves right now. Lend him to me for a few days, what's the problem? Hey, what do you know? Bai Yanjun sneered, the soul of a mysterious realm and one that can be taken away, do you think it's something that happens every year? Not only does it not happen every year, it might not even happen for hundreds of years. You little brat, holding him in your hands, humph, when the time comes, At this point, the White Hell King suddenly hesitated as though he had thought of something. He didn't speak. Not only did he not speak, even the sneer and anger on his face disappeared. After staring at Li Yunxin for a while, he suddenly giggled and said, Let's do it this way. He circled around Li Yunxin a few times. I'll lend it to you for now. But since Ben Jun sold you this favor, I will have to repay it. Li Yunxin looked back at him. After a while he said, Tell me about it. Bai Yanjun shrugged. You're a smart kid. Back then, on the roadside outside the wilderness forest, you should have died when you slept with that Lao Dao, but I spared you. After that, you went to the city of Wei to fight with Bai Yunxin and Longzhou. You deserve to die too. It's only because I gave you the method of possession that you survived. Not to mention the fact that you've become a judge of the Yang realm, and that I've borrowed millions of yin souls from you. You should know that it was not because Ben Jun saw that you were good-looking that I helped you again and again. Li Yunxin thought about it and nodded slightly. You're right. It's not that you wanted to help me, but someone asked you to help me. You had no choice but to do it. Bai Yanjun coughed slightly. What do you know? Let's not talk about this. Let's just talk about the things that you've done. A few months ago you were just a rogue Taoist in the state of the outer fringe. Now you've become a great demon in the state of true state. Not many people in the world would have such a good encounter. Then you should know that I'm helping you because I have something for you to do. Li Yunxin was silent for a while. He sighed. I understand. It's all a routine. Tell me, what do you want me to do? Bai Yanjun stared at him with a pair of dark eyes. He said slowly, I want you to call Daotong Kenzo and the demons to fight it out. Li Yunxin was slightly stunned when he heard this. He thought for a while and raised his head. But they're about to fight now. If you're talking about stirring up trouble and fanning the flames, you should know about the Freemasonry. They've been doing it longer than me. Their tricks are deeper than mine and their results are better than mine. Bai Yanjun stared at him. Since you know about those things, things will be easy. Not only do I want you to call Daotong Kenzo and the demons to fight, but I also want you to drag the Freemasonry into it. Ask the three of them to fight together. The bigger the better. It's best. He thought for a while. Let them all die. Li Yunxin's expression did not change. Even the sharpest person would not be able to tell what he was thinking. He stood on the spot and thought about what Bai Yanjun said. He thought for a long time before he frowned. What do you mean? You told me before that your and the Black Yama King's job is to maintain the stability and prosperity of the world, so that the people in the human world can live and multiply. But you should know what it means if a full-scale war breaks out between the three parties. No one can escape the flames of war. Many people will die. What do you mean by asking me to do such a thing? Bai Yanjun raised his eyebrows. Times have changed. I haven't come to look for you for so many days. Don't you want to know why? Li Yunxin thought for a while. No. Bai Yanjun blinked. He seemed to be used to Li Yunxin's merciless answer and reaction. He continued to say, we are not those stupid animals that only know how to eat and breed. We want to take care of the people in the world and let them multiply and multiply. Naturally we have a motive. It's just that we didn't need it in the past but we need it now. This kind of thing. So I'm also unwilling. Li Yunxin sighed. Listening to you, you really have a lot of negative energy. Every time, it would wear away the little bit of hope and vision I had for the world. Then tell me, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? You are after all celestial beings, immortals? What kind of things are you? I'm so strange. Bai Yanjun didn't care about his sarcasm. He just continued, because it's not good to tell you everything. There are too many things you don't know. But I want you to do something so I can't leave you without a clue. So now let me ask you. You only know that there are celestial beings in this world. You think that celestial beings are superior and enjoy immortal happiness forever. But you also think that the world is prosperous and orderly. But have you ever thought that celestial beings also have troubles? There are two kinds of troubles for celestial beings. One is an ancient devil and the other is a true devil. It took Li Yunxin a while to realize that these two words weren't periosteum and hazelnut mushroom. It wasn't that he wanted to argue but because he had never heard of these two words. Whether it was folklore or Taoist scriptures, or even the illusions passed by word of mouth among cultivators, these two words didn't exist. The only thing that was similar to these two words probably meant that the art saint of the previous generation was possessed by the devil. This was such a strange thing. Even the cultivators who claimed to know most of the world's secrets were so unfamiliar with these two words. This really piqued his interest. He frowned and asked, an ancient devil and a true devil. What do you mean? A cultivator who has entered the demonic path? Or a celestial being who has entered the demonic path? Is it two kinds or just two people? Bai Yanjun said to him solemnly, you don't need to ask these questions for now. In short, you have to know that this world isn't as peaceful as you think. And you have to do this job well. Li Yunxin thought for a moment, why me? Because I have tested you before and I already know that you are the most suitable. Bai Yanjun stopped smiling and became serious. I say that you are a human, but you don't have much humanity. I say that you are a demon but you are not only fierce and cruel. Besides, you don't care about this world and you don't care about these people. You are the most suitable to do this kind of thing. Some of the words he mentioned made Li Yunxin slightly apprehensive. He thought about it seriously again and said, then in your place I'm just a tool. What if I succeed? Bai Yanjun looked at him. That depends on your luck. Even I don't know what will happen in the future. It sounds like an unscrupulous boss giving you an IOU. Li Yunxin sighed. What if I don't do it? Since you said that I am the most suitable and you spent so much effort on me, Can I talk about the conditions? Bai Yanjun looked at him. Then he slowly approached him and revealed a gloomy smile on his face. Little man, you should know one thing. When I dote on you, I can let you be willful and naughty. But in some other matters, if you dare to be willful and naughty, I won't dote on you anymore. He slowly floated to Li Yunxin's ear and stuck close to him, whispering, You think you are special? Oh, you are indeed special. But special people like you, have they never appeared before? If you don't listen, Ben Jun will wait for another few hundred or 1,000 years, and then wait for someone like you. After saying this, he suddenly retreated, returning to the darkness in the sky. He stared at Li Yunxin and smiled miserably. Do your work well. I will not urge you, but you must do your work well. I will watch you. Then he disappeared. And Li Yunxin stood in the same place, blinking his eyes quickly several times. Should not have misunderstood, right? For the first time in his life, he doubted his ability to understand. He recalled the last few sentences of Bai Yanjun over and over again, trying to analyze them from other angles. But after trying a few times, he realized it should be the meaning that he understood. He knew that he was a traveler. When he slowly came back to his senses, he felt a slight chill on his back. He was sweating just now, and now the wind was blowing. Li Yunxin stood in the same place for a while, then let out a long and gentle sigh. Then he walked to the side and stood against the rock wall, hiding himself in the darkness to think about some things. Today, Bai Yanjun was not his usual self, actually threatening him with such a tyrannical attitude. He thought that he would give in. Of course he would give in. What a joke that was the Yama King. If not for the lack of nutrition factors like attitude, what he wanted him to do was exactly what he wanted to do. It was just that the path had to be changed a little, the method had to be adjusted, and the vision had to be broadened. At least at this stage. Probably the Yama King also knew that this was an extremely complicated and difficult thing, so he said, I will not urge you. According to the concept of time of those celestial beings and immortals, it would be a very, very long time. But Li Yunxin had always been a curious person. Therefore he had a very strong desire to know what the big events, the ancient devils, and the true devils were, which he had never even heard of. Moreover, people like to talk nonsense like controlling their own destiny. He came to this world and knew that there was a way to go against the natural order of cultivation, so of course this desire was even stronger. But now he became very unhappy. He knew that something might happen in this world, but he did not know what exactly is going to happen. This made him feel powerless to go with the flow. Personally, this feeling was too annoying. Chapter 256. Therefore he closed his eyes and pondered in the demon's cave, beside the blood feast of human flesh. He needed to change the strategy that he had been thinking about every day. But this change could not be done overnight. Things happened so suddenly that he had to make every second count. Li Yunxin knew that he had been carefully walking on a tightrope that traversed the cliff. On one side of the tightrope was the Daotong Kenzo, and on the other side was the heterodox demon. On the tightrope he could see the blue sky and white clouds. But once something went wrong, coupled with a little bad luck, he would fall into the abyss of eternal damnation. In the past he had more or less placed his hopes on Bai Yanjun's special care for him. But now he realized that the others' care must have something to ask of him. And he knew that he was not the only one. What Bai Yanjun said to him meant that there were others who had done the same thing and received the same care but failed. He was not the only one. He had to prove his worth so that he could exchange for a greater value. Damn it. Li Yunxin sighed. He heard footsteps. The footsteps echoed in the long cavern. They were relatively light. Of course, this relatively light was relative to the ordinary monster kings. His own footsteps were also in the relatively light category. Most monster kings were tall and strong. Even if they were not, they would try their best to eat until they were fat. Perhaps this was the primal instinct of wild beasts. The bigger they were, the more intimidating they would be. And he had been waiting here for such a person, refusing to continue walking. Monster kings did not care about inner qualities or talent. Compared to them he was small, so it was hard to feel close to them. He at least needed a person of similar size as a partner. Such a person would definitely be laughed at. And this kind of ridicule could shorten the distance between two people in a short time. He was the one who liked to trick people. So he looked up and saw a person of the same size as him. People in this world were generally short. In his eyes, the average adult male in the city of Wei was about 165 centimeters tall, and the average female was about 155 centimeters tall. This was because the city of Wei was a big city in the world, and the standard of living was much better. This was a very normal phenomenon. People at this time were short of food and clothing, and they gave birth at an early age. It would be a miracle if she had developed well. It was in such a world that he stood out from the crowd, tall and graceful. Walking on the streets of the city of Wei, there were always people looking at him. However, his physique wasn't considered outstanding among the demons, and could only be considered tall and straight among the cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo. Demons were transformed from beasts, so they always pursued tall and big bodies. On the other hand, cultivators lived in luxury and cultivated their bodies all year round, so it would be strange if they didn't develop well. However, the demon king walking over was similar to him but slightly wider. His body was rippling with muscles. This demon monarch was dressed in purple, but his upper body only covered his chest and back, revealing a pair of arms with blue veins. The crotch area of his lower body was covered with pink silk, and below there was a pair of short purple pants. I don't know where he got his hands on some silk and brocade, but he didn't care what color or shape they were and just put them on himself. However, this demon monarch had a pair of big black eyes. When he walked, he looked left and right like a child. Li Yunxin was secretly watching him. The demon king walked to the end of the cliff at the cave entrance, stopped and looked down. When he saw the scene in the hall and smelled blood, he frowned. He didn't like this scene. He didn't like the smell either. This made Li Yunxin slightly surprised. There were demons that didn't like blood? So he stood up and walked out of the shadows. I don't like the smell either. The purple-clothed demon monarch obviously didn't get hit on often. Hearing this, he seemed to be surprised. He first looked at Li Yunxin, then looked left and right. Seeing that there was no one around, he knew that the other party was indeed talking to him, so he blinked his eyes, slightly opened his mouth and said, "Ah." This reaction caused Li Yunxin to be slightly stunned in her heart. This was normal for a secular person. He didn't see much of the world and was timid and shy. Suddenly seeing a stranger talking to him, he nervously blinked his eyes. He opened his mouth slightly, unconsciously revealing his nervousness and surprise. His slightly lengthened middle finger meant that this guy was usually a timid person. But the problem was, this was a Motherf *** king demon monarch. But he still maintained his composure and walked 3 steps forward, smiling and cupping his hands. "I'm flowing jade-faced little silver dragon. I came from Dongting to attend the meeting. How should I address this demon monarch?" This demon monarch still didn't speak. He stared at Li Yunxin with wide eyes, nervously widening his nostrils, and his face flushed. After a long while, he squeezed out a sentence from his throat. I'm old 7. Li Yunxin slightly narrowed his eyes, thought for a while and then smiled. "Old 7, are you the 7th of the evil king's adopted sons?" Li Yunxin's tone was gentle, his expression was gentle, and his appearance was even gentler. So this demon monarch who called himself Old 7 slowly calmed down. After calming down, his speech was much smoother, but he was still shy. Yes. I'm the adopted son, I'm Old 7, my adopted father is the evil king. I still have 6 elder brothers, they're all inside." "Oh, I'm late, I'm going to be scolded by my elder brothers." After saying this, he hurriedly left as if he was really afraid of being scolded. Li Yunxin rolled his eyes and hurriedly stepped forward to stop him. "Brother, wait a minute. Since you're late, you'll definitely be scolded if you go like this. Why don't you go with me and say that you saw me on the road and had a pleasant conversation? They can't scold me in front of the guests. Come, tell me which of your 6 elder brothers are. I also admire the reputation of the 7 of you, and I want to make friends with you. There's no time like the present, isn't today a good day?" As he said this, he went forward to hold Old 7's hand, and then rubbed his strong and powerful arm. Wow. His muscles were really as hard as steel. Old 7's body was unreasonably hard. To say that it was as hard as steel was not a good description. As a dragon's, Li Yunxin's body was strong, and he could leave a mark on a big rock with just a little bit of force from his fingernails. But when he brushed against Old 7's arm, not even a white mark was left. Old 7's hand was grabbed by Li Yunxin, and he immediately felt embarrassed and wanted to shake it off. Li Yunxin let him be. But after rubbing his arm a few times, he already knew that Old 7's cultivation level was not low, at least not below the transcendent state. He also didn't know what his real body was, but it was able to withstand his grip. Although Old 7 was embarrassed, it seemed that because of the physical contact just now, the distance between him and Li Yunxin seemed to be a little closer. Li Yunxin let go of his hand, sighed, and pretended to be hurt, but he didn't say anything. Old 7 was originally going to shake him off and leave. But when he turned his head to look at him, he couldn't bear to see him like this. He blinked for a while and then frowned his thick eyebrows and said, Don't be angry. Come, I'll show you a treasure. Finishing, he rubbed his hand across his waist and stared at him impatiently. For some reason, Li Yunxin's hair stood on end from being stared at by him. But he still slowly walked over. Only then did he clearly see the thing that Old Seven had taken out from his waist. Then Li Yunxin frowned, dumbfounded. Old Seven's pair of thick and strong hands was actually holding a gourd. Old Seven saw that he was in a daze, and thought that it was his treasure that attracted him. Finally he no longer frowned and began laughing. Don't be angry. Look at my treasure, it can suck you in. You're called the romantic jade-faced Little Silver. Little Silver, if I call you, do you dare to answer? It would be strange if Li Yunxin agreed. Not only did he not agree, the expression on his face became strange. He took a step back and carefully examined Old Seven from top to bottom. Then his expression became even more strange and he suddenly asked, Old Seven, your big brother, is he very strong? Your second brother, is he able to see far and hear far? Your third brother, is he like a copperhead and iron arms? Your fourth brother, is he able to breathe fire? Old Seven did not take his question seriously and was slightly taken aback. How do you know about this? Then after thinking for a while, he cheerfully nodded his head. Could it be that you're a friend of one of my brothers? Most of the demons had innate abilities. This ability could often be used as a trump card, and would not be easily revealed to the outside world. But the 7 adopted sons of the evil king were also great demons, so it was not strange for them to know about this. After all, they would often fight and it would be seen by others. Because of this, when Li Yunxin said this, Old Seven felt that perhaps he was acquainted with his brothers in the past. But after saying this, he discovered that Li Yunxin's expression became even more strange. This demon king who called himself Old Seven had never seen such a complicated expression on anyone's face. After a long while, Li Yunxin finally let out a light breath. How could there be such an honor? I've only heard a friend mention it before. I say. Old Seven, one more question. Do you know who the previous one was? If Lao Chi was a clever person, he would probably know what Li Yunxin was asking about. But he looked like a muscular demon, but in fact he was a simple-minded demon. Because of this, Li Yunxin's words caused him to be at a loss, and he could only open his mouth. Li Yunxin sighed in his heart, and decided to temporarily change the topic. But suddenly, a voice came to his ears. The previous one you mentioned, are you referring to the great demon that was defeated and killed by my adopted father? This was a thick and deep bass voice. It immediately made people think of broad shoulders, a steely chin, rock-like muscles, and other elements of male hormones that were off the charts. Li Yunxin immediately turned his head, but there was no one next to him. So he knew that the other party had used some kind of secret voice transmission type of magical power. This Old Seven spoke and acted like an ordinary person. The voice that came to his ears sounded serious, and did not have the viciousness or ruthlessness of ordinary demons. Adding on the adopted father, in his words, Li Yunxin knew that it should be one of the older brothers of Old Seven. Perhaps the method of secret voice transmission was rare among the demons, but it was not difficult for cultivators. Li Yunxin smiled, his lips moving slightly as he said soundlessly, "It sounds like this is Old Seven's second brother. I am the flowing jade-faced Little Silver. I came here today with the intention of making friends with everyone." He paused for a moment, then a bold idea suddenly flashed through his mind. He used a second to consider the cause and effect, then added another sentence. "I want to discuss important matters with Old Seven." The other party did not immediately reply. Li Yunxin then turned his head to look at the hall. There were people coming and going in the hall, light and shadow crisscrossing. Li Yunxin used 2 or 3 seconds to see the people he was looking for. The 6 demon kings were sitting towards the north of the hall. Although the demons did not like the etiquette of the human world, but they still had to pay attention to seniority. So after transforming into a human, they had to learn some of the customs and hierarchy of the human world. For example, the seating in the hall was very particular. Those little demon kings that did not make the mark were sitting cross-legged, and those that were slightly more powerful had a stone platform. If they were more skilled, they would have stone stools. But if they were a bit more serious, they would have large stone tables and tall stone chairs. Right now, the 6 demon kings that Li Yunxin saw were sitting on chairs that were cut out from a large piece of stone. Although they were not as tall as the other demons, but they were all as muscular as Old Seven, and had an awe-inspiring aura. His gaze found them, and found that the 6 demon kings had long been looking in this direction. Their eyes shone brightly in the light of the fire, and he could still feel the essence within them from such a distance. Li Yunxin saw their attire. The clothes of these 6 brothers were similar to old 7, only the color was different. Eldest brother wore red clothes, second brother wore orange clothes. Third brother wore yellow clothes, fourth brother wore green clothes. Fifth brother wore green clothes and sixth brother wore blue clothes. This old 7 was red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue and purple. Li Yunxin looked carefully, and a strange smile appeared on his face. Then he cupped his hands towards them from afar and turned to old 7. "Seventh brother, I've already met the 6 brothers. Please introduce me to him." Looking at the dumb and shy old 7, of course he did not know what Li Yunxin was thinking. But he really liked this new friend. Where else could he find such a gentle and beautiful person among the demons who could talk? Moreover, the 7 brothers were different from most of the demons in the hall. For example, the demons liked to eat blood, but the 7 brothers hated it. Now, the 6 of them only drank water in this hall, and even the little demons of Pitfall Mountain did not approach them. They just gave them food and ran away as if afraid that the smell of blood would rush into the 6 brothers' noses. Thus, old 7 agreed and pulled Li Yunxin's hand down the cliff. Moreover, as soon as he entered the hall, the noise in the hall immediately died down. Old 7 looked bashful, and was even more nervous now that there were many people around. Once he was nervous, his face would tighten. He was big and burly with a green chin, thick eyebrows and a face full of muscles. No matter what the reason was, when he tightened his face, it was scary to look at, and he was one of the evil king's adopted sons. The demons in the hall made way for him. They looked at Li Yunxin and then looked at the gourd on old 7's waist, and knew that it was also a rare magic weapon. The 2 of them went straight to the north of the hall. After they left, the demons went back to their own business. Their thoughts were always less than humans. When Li Yunxin and old 7 got closer, they saw the orange-robed Yao King stand up, tightly pursed his lips and stared at Li Yunxin. Old 7 was slightly frightened by his brother's gaze, and was afraid of being scolded. Li Yunxin knew that it was not directed at him. He patted old 7's shoulder and walked over. He walked in front of old 6 until he was in front of second brother. However, the expression on his face had changed. If it was a worldly person who had experienced many things in the world, it was not difficult for them to understand what Li Yunxin's expression meant. He frowned slightly, narrowed his eyes and slightly opened his mouth. His gaze swept past the monster kings one by one, but he was sure that every single one of them was carefully sizing them up. When he slowly walked over, he would even shake his head in an almost imperceptible manner and sigh a few times. When he walked in front of second brother and looked away from old 7, his chest rose and fell rapidly and he closed his eyes, and then calmed down. Then he looked at second brother with a loving gaze and sighed. "You're so strong now." This second brother was known for his clairvoyant and clairaudient skills. Previously, when he heard Li Yunxin talking to his 7th brother on the cliff, he was suspicious, so he invited Li Yunxin here. When he saw Li Yunxin, he felt that Li Yunxin was unfamiliar and strange. As a result, his vigilance increased. But who would have guessed that this fellow would suddenly act like this, and use such an expression to stand in front of him and say such words? Second brother was taken aback. The 6 Yao Kings subconsciously looked at each other. In the words of the human world, it was looking at each other. Because the attitude of this flirtatious jade-faced little silver dragon was like an old man in the human world who had been separated from his children and grandchildren for a long time. After many years, when he returned home and saw that his children and grandchildren had all grown up, but did not recognize him, his heart was filled with pain and pity, but also a bit of relief. Together with that, "You're so strong now," the 6 were somewhat dumbfounded. They did not know where this little silver dragon came from. The second brother was stunned for a moment before he frowned. He knew that this person might not be ordinary. He had asked about that person before. His 7th brother was young and did not understand, but the 6 of them understood. The person that little silver dragon spoke of was the great demon that was defeated by the evil king a long time ago. As for the 7 of them, they were previously the subordinates of that great demon. As for how he became the adopted son of the evil king, and why he was willing to be his adopted son, the story was much more complicated. Therefore he looked at Li Yunxin, hesitated slightly, then said in a low voice, "Who exactly are you? The things that you ask are not good to ask here." Then he raised his head and looked around, then added, "My adoptive father is not willing to hear such words." But this little silver dragon did not seem to care about the evil king at all. He lightly shook his head. "You 7 children, do you still remember his name? Now that you're here, You don't even dare to mention his name? The demon king being called a child should have made him furious. If it were any other demon they would be even more furious. Their brains were too lazy to think. But these 6 people seemed to be those rare, intelligent people that Li Yunxin loved dearly. First they were stunned, then silent. Then the expression on second brother's face became more and more gentle. But within this gentleness, there was an obvious pretense of anger and indifference in Li Yunxin's eyes. Snorting coldly, "What is there to be afraid to mention? Us 7 brothers used to be the great demon of the mysterious realm, known as Old Demon Fu Lu. So what if we say it?" Chapter 257. Li Yunxin's expression paused on his face for a while. In other words, it was sluggish. But this was not a pretense. Such an expression in the eyes of the second brother was, this little silver dragon did not expect that he would really dare to say it. But only Li Yunxin himself knew why it was like this. After a moment of sluggishness, he lightly exhaled, the expression on his face relaxing. "So it was like this," he said to himself in an extremely soft voice. When he saw the 7th brother at the entrance of the cave, he felt that he was familiar. After talking with him for a while, he had already come to a conclusion. And saying all this now was just to prove, fuck. This really was the 7 Calabash brothers. In this world there was only one person who would have such a bad taste. And there was only one person who was highly similar to what he knew, the painting saint. That guy, just how many things had he done in this world? Li Yunxin did not believe that because of some kind of coincidence, there was an evil king in this world. He felt that this was the Scorpion King. And these 7 adopted sons, they were clearly the Calabash brothers. Just now he had forced out another key character, Old Demon Fulu. He really did not know how to evaluate the bad taste of that person 2,000 years ago. That was clearly Old Calabash brother. Li Yunxin was almost certain that these people were created by the painting saint, just like how he created the dragon lady that was possessed by the 3 flowers. But the problem was, why did that person do this? It was normal for the painting saint to leave behind strange words and strange paintings. But even if it was the painting saint to create so many great demons, he must have expended a lot of effort. That day when he, Li Yunxin, created the body of the dragon lady for Mrs. Sanhua, he almost dropped a realm, and he only created an empty realm body. What kind of price did the painting saint have to pay for such a big move? But in reality there was another explanation. Most of the time, Li Yunxin would say some absurd things. Previously, when he was imparting life experience to a group of unruly Taoists in Wei City's Jade Flower Pavilion, he said, "Gu Nala Black Demon Immortal." Later on, he called himself Tang Xuanzang, and later on, he said that he was some flirtatious jade-faced little lewd dragon. He often spoke words that the people of this world did not understand. In addition to the reason that his psychological defense mechanism did not want him to completely expose his heart to the world, it was also because he was releasing information. It was like the scent released by a beast when it was in heat could be smelled by the opposite sex from more than 10 kilometers away, and then thousands of troops would come to meet it. He was the same. He knew there were others like him in the world. If there were any of his kind in the world who had heard any of these strange things he uttered, they would have been aware of his existence. He wanted to find them. Perhaps some people would hide themselves if they were in the same situation as him. He and the enemy were both in the dark, waiting for the right time to expose the enemy or himself before making a decision. But the problem was that not everyone in the world liked this kind of style. For Li Yunxin, he preferred to see both sides bare their fangs and claws, and then have a thrilling battle. He didn't want to wait. He wanted to find friends or enemies. He wanted to attack. But now, the art saint seemed to have the same view and attitude as him. That saint left clues everywhere in this world that only certain people could understand. In the eyes of the natives of this world, there was nothing special. However, once people like Li Yunxin saw it, it was like a torch in the dark, extremely bright and dazzling. The problem was, who did the art saint want to show it to? Why did he create such a group of demons in this place? But these were not questions that he could figure out at the moment. He restrained his expression in front of second brother, exhaled again, and said indifferently in a relieved and gratified tone, "Okay. You still remember him." Li Yunxin was good at reading people. This kind of reading included and was not limited to the character, psychology, behavior, and habits of people, but also many small details and big situations. He was worried about one thing before. The 7th brother looked bashful, but this bashful was only relative to the demons. For example, a child was innocent and cute. When he was innocent and cute, he was chasing butterflies under the shade of the tree, then his innocence and cuteness were not shared with the butterflies. Li Yunxin was worried that the bashful seventh brother would shyly walk in front of a person, and then smile shyly while shyly crushing that person's head. That would not be cute at all. So when they walked through the hall just now, he paid attention to every movement of the seventh brother's eyes. Then he realized that the seventh brother was very unwilling to see this scene. Not because of too noisy or bad smell, but because he couldn't bear it. This meant that this demon might be kinder than Li Yunxin himself. It was because of this conclusion that he did what he did in front of second brother. Because he had to take a risk to do something. He had to convince the demons. Even if he could not convince the demons, he had to convince the evil king. Even if he could not convince the evil king, he had to make him agree with his point of view on other things. Before he came here, he had a set of plans in his mind. However, the appearance of Bai Yanjun forced him to adjust his plan. He had to ask himself to achieve the purpose of this trip in the shortest time. Therefore, he had to take risks based on his bold assumptions and inferences. However, once he was in such a predicament, he felt his blood was boiling. The sense of anxiety and powerlessness brought by being trapped in Dongting disappeared in an instant. His heart began to beat happily. He felt that he was on a wonderful and exciting battlefield again. He loved the feeling of knowing a person and then playing with him. It made him feel like he was the king of the world. This kind of abnormal excitement made Li Yunxin happy. It even made him completely immersed in the role and become the person he had set for himself. He asked about old demon Fulu in front of second brother just to see how the seven brothers treated that person. This was the first dangerous move. If the seven brothers now really joined the evil king, he would get himself into trouble by asking about this. If he fought with the seven brothers, he would have nothing to do today. However, seventh brother's reaction made him sure of his judgment. Second brother's words also made him understand that the seven brothers didn't really follow the evil king. They still remembered old demon Fulu. Yes or no? He gambled based on the clues and got the result today. Until now. He began to make the second dangerous move. The evil king would probably show up soon. He had to temporarily deal with the seven brothers before the evil king appeared. And whether or not this risky move would be correct would depend on whether the painting saint from a long time ago was professional and meticulous in his work, or if he was bored enough. Just as he expected, after hearing him say, "You still remember him," the seven brothers' faces became more and more doubtful. They looked at each other again. Second brother frowned and asked, "Who are you?" Li Yunxin smiled slightly. "I know you seven brothers are not actually demons. You are different from them." He raised his hand and pointed at the monster kings who were feasting in the distance. "You are not the same kind of people as them. You are brothers on the vine. And your adoptive father, Humph. I'm afraid you came to this world because of your adoptive father. Now that I've said all this, you seven children, can you guess who I am?" Then he realized that he had made the right move. Second brother and the others showed imperceptible surprise on their faces. But Li Yunxin looked deeper. He found that there was a trace of doubt in their surprise. Because of this doubt, second brother frowned and asked, "You? Could it be that you are Grandpa Mountain Gods?" From Li Yunxin's point of view, this was a simple and plain little wisdom of the supporting characters. Second brother thought he had done enough, but the subtle expression on his face still betrayed him. This was a trap. They didn't know anything about Grandpa Mountain God and just wanted to test if Li Yunxin really knew something. If he said yes, it must be a lie. But such a trap could still reveal something. These seven monster kings were said to have been the evil king's adoptive sons for hundreds of years. For such a long time they would not always be naive children. They must have done a lot of things that they should have done. Then, would a man in his 50s or 60s like to call someone grandpa or uncle? But second brother said, "Grandpa Mountain God," in a subtle manner. This was the perspective of a child. When this monster king was testing Li Yunxin, he subconsciously put himself in the perspective of a child. This meant that there was a reference or a candidate in his mind. Because of the existence of this candidate, he subconsciously substituted a similar character to test himself. Li Yunxin knew that he had made the right bet again. The art saint was really bored. He really came up with the guy that he expected. And now the person in second brother's mind must be that guy. So he smiled leniently. "You are second brother, but it is always you talking to me. Because you are smart and smart." He then turned to look at big brother who wanted to say something but hesitated. "You are the big brother. You are very strong, but it is a pity that you are reckless." He then looked at third brother and smiled. "You are afraid of being spanked. Fourth brother, you are afraid of the cold." As he said this, the few of them showed a surprised expression. Perhaps some of them knew, but they could point out their weaknesses one by one. Li Yunxin sighed and said, "If my old friend was here, he would also smile when he saw you guys like this." At this moment, second brother could no longer hide his thoughts. All the words in his heart were written on his face. He only stared and opened his mouth. "Are you that pangolin?" What Grandpa said was true. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He smiled. "Yes. Your grandpa should have told you. How did the evil king come about that day? You chiseled through the mountain and released him." There was no need for Li Yunxin to guide him. Second brother told her everything. "Grandpa said that it was you who released the evil king by accident, and it was you who found Grandpa and took the precious gourd seeds with him. Then we were born. But I have never seen you before, I only heard from Grandpa." "You actually, really have you?" Li Yunxin sighed in his heart. That art saint, just how bored was he? He put on a show and even made up the background story. But since the art saint did such a thing, Li Yunxin also guessed that he had done such a thing. Now, his speculation was exactly the same as the art saint's thinking 2,000 years ago. This made Li Yunxin more and more eager to know what kind of person he was. He often saw bits and pieces of the art saint left behind in this world, as if that person was an invisible person who always lingered around him. He even felt that if that person was still alive, it was very likely that he would become his friend. A truly interesting and crazy friend that Li Yunxin recognized from the bottom of his heart. So he became more and more excited. Not only because he was about to control these 7 silly children in such a short time, but also because he always felt that there was a deeper meaning behind the things that the art saint left here. Or was it because he felt that there was a deeper meaning behind what the art saint had left behind? Or because he always felt that the things that the art saint left here had a deeper meaning? So he sighed again. "Of course there is me. But these years I have hidden my identity." Sigh. So he sighed again. "Of course there is me." After he said this, he looked around. The demon blood feast was still going on, and the screams of agony could be heard without end. After saying this, he looked around. The demon blood feast was still going on, and the screams were endless. But the demon king's laughter and curses were louder. At first there were some fellows who were looking at them, but they soon lost interest when they saw that they were neither eating nor fighting. 200 to 300 demon kings would attend the meeting. At this time there were already more than 100 people, and the hall was becoming increasingly crowded. Li Yunxin realized that she didn't have much time left. Evil King was probably going to appear soon. Li Yunxin realized that there was not much time left for him. The Evil King was probably going to appear. In the next moment, his arms were covered with greenish-gray scales that were as hard as iron. This was the true form of the demon. In this way he once again proved his identity. After all, it was difficult for the 7 brothers to tell the difference between a dragon's scale and a pangolin's scale. Then he moved closer and the smile on his face disappeared. "Old Demon Fulu is an old friend of mine. Before this, I wasn't free and could only watch him suffer," Li Yunxin said in a low voice while glaring at them. "Now that I'm free, I'm going to avenge him. I know all the reasons and difficulties you children have. It's just that you have to help me with something today." Just as he said this, 3 horns sounded from the hollow mountain. It was unknown what the bugle horn was made of, but it was deep and powerful. Then it circled around the mountain, causing everyone to tremble slightly. Then a little demon monster with a loud voice shouted majestically, "The evil king has arrived." As Li Yunxin spoke, she looked up and saw a majestic demon wearing purple armor, with a green face and fangs, and a pair of moon-white, dark brown spotted horns on the sides of his ears slowly descending from the darkness above her. The evil king has arrived. As soon as the evil king entered, the demons in the hall immediately stopped talking. Although there were still some muddle-headed little demons who drank too much and were still making noise, some armored demons from the Pitfall Mountain had already landed in the crowd. Seeing those who were drunk and didn't listen to the dissuasion, the demons didn't ask whose subordinates they were and just hit their heads with a mace. Their heads were smashed into pieces and they no longer made noise. Because of this thunderous method of clearing the hall finally quieted down. Before this, Li Yunxin had seized the last moment and stared at the second brother. "Help me persuade the evil king to go to Dongting and fight with the Daotong Kenzo. If it's done, the old demon Fulu in the netherworld." He stopped talking. Because the last noisy little demon was also killed by the demons from the Pitfall Mountain. The evil king finally landed. Ignoring the big monster kings, he separated from the crowd and came to the north. He saw his 7 adopted sons and Li Yunxin. The big monster in the mysterious realm laughed 3 times, showing a pair of pale fangs in his mouth. "Ha, my good children, who is this?" When he spoke, he stared at Li Yunxin with his beady eyes under his thick eyebrows. "I saw you talking for a long time just now. Now that I look at it again, why does this guest smell like a human?" As the evil king said this, the monster kings around him immediately glared at him fiercely. Li Yunxin instantly became the focus of attention. Chapter 258. Li Yunxin didn't speak, but looked at the 7 brothers beside him. He had already used a lot of methods just now, which was why he felt that the 7 of them would probably listen to him. Even if they were still hesitant and could not make the final decision, they would at least play along with the evil king for the time being so that he could deceive them. However, he didn't expect that. The words he said and the momentum he created just now seemed to be very effective. It was so good that the 7 brothers were still in a state of turmoil, even to the point where they couldn't control themselves. They seemed to be trying hard to calm their emotions, but it wasn't very successful. When Li Yunxin looked at them, he found that the eldest brother was staring straight at the evil king with a pair of big black eyes, almost spitting out flames. He also felt that it was inappropriate, so he quickly lowered his head to hide his expression. If he was alone, it wouldn't be a problem. But the problem was, almost all 7 of them were like this. The evil king originally stared fiercely at Li Yunxin. But now, when he looked at his adopted sons again, he found that they all had the same expression on their faces. He immediately became confused. The profound realm great demon's eyes moved back and forth between Li Yunxin and his 7 adopted sons, and finally frowned even more tightly. He reached out his hand and pointed at the most innocent and shy 7th brother, saying in a deep voice, "7th brother, what's wrong with you?" Then he squinted at Li Yunxin. "What did this person say to you?" So Li Yunxin realized that he seemed to have made a mistake. He underestimated the 7's feelings for the old demon Fulu. He thought that the 7 of them had been the evil king's adopted sons for hundreds of years, and even if he made them believe that he was really the old friend of the old demon Fulu, they would still hesitate for a while. After weighing the pros and cons, they would completely accept the path and fate he had arranged for them, and then they would worry about how to take revenge and how to deal with the evil king. But he forgot something else. The emotions of the demons were pure and strong. He had experienced it once before with the Lord Dongting, but now he was speculating about the demons' actions based on human feelings. No matter why the 7 of them had endured for hundreds of years under the evil king's throne, now that he mentioned the past, it was like lightning stirring the fire, causing the accumulated resentment in their hearts to pour out in torrents. The outpouring this time was so fierce that even the 7 of them almost couldn't control themselves. And now that the evil king asked the 7th brother, the 7th brother no longer lowered his head. He stared at the evil king with wide eyes, and after a while, he suddenly said, "We won't be fooled by you again." Li Yunxin sighed as soon as she said this. He began to size up the demon kings behind the Diablo king and estimate their strength. Once again he observed the terrain of the cave to see if the escape route that he had prepared beforehand would be useful at this time. But in the next moment he noticed something strange. There was something off about the evil king's demeanor. Logically speaking, under the premise that evil king killed old demon Fulu and adopted the 7 brothers as his sons through some means, he should also be wary of the 7 brothers. And if they were on guard, they would more or less be prepared for the possibility of them betraying them. Then, at this moment, they should have revealed a cold and sinister smile on their faces. Then they should have realized that these 7 brothers are indeed preparing to betray us. But now the only expression on evil king's face was shock. The evil king's true form was a giant scorpion. He had transformed into a human, but the skin on his face was still harder than that of a normal person, so his expression was not obvious. But now, his mouth was half open, and the 2 big fangs in his mouth opened and closed subconsciously. Li Yunxin thought that this should be his way of expressing his surprise. The evil king froze for a moment before asking, "What are you talking about?" Then she looked at Li Yunxin. "Who exactly are you?" Since the 7th brother said that, the other 6 brothers didn't hide it anymore. 2nd brother snorted and jumped out from behind the stone platform to stand guard in front of Li Yunxin. He glared at the evil king and pointed at him. "Hey, who do you think he is? Do you remember who let you out? He was that pangolin. You deceived us so much." After 2nd brother spoke, the other 5 brothers glared at the evil king. The 7 brothers stood in front of Li Yunxin like a wall of flesh, protecting him behind them as if they were afraid that he would make any mistakes. Normally, at this point the evil king should have already turned hostile. But what surprised Li Yunxin even more was that when he looked at the evil king through the gap between the 7 brothers, he found that the evil king was even more surprised. This surprise didn't seem to be fake. A profound realm big demon had no reason to pretend in front of so many small demons. What is going on? The evil king said in surprise again. Pangolin? Which pangolin? You 7 silly boys, you didn't believe me but chose to believe this. At this point he raised his eyebrows and shouted angrily, who is this person? How did he sneak in? Guards. As he shouted, the hundreds of demons behind him responded in unison. But the evil king didn't want them, but the snake spirit Seven Duanjin who was guarding the entrance of the Pitfall Mountain. The snake spirit came quickly. She probably heard the news from the small demons in the cave and knew that something had happened. When the evil king shouted again, the snake spirit hurriedly separated the crowd and walked forward. But she didn't panic. While walking leisurely, she looked at Li Yunxin through the gap between the 7 brothers. After a few glances, she came to the side of the tall evil king and bowed slightly. Your Majesty, don't be angry. I knew something was wrong with this person just now and I let him in on purpose. Your Majesty, please listen to me. The evil king was tall, twice as long as Li Yunxin. This snake spirit was unusually tall among humans, but she only reached the evil king's waist. After she said so, the evil king frowned again and bent down so that the snake spirit could whisper in his ear. After listening to Seven Duanjin's whisper, his brows finally relaxed. Good. The evil king stared at Li Yunxin. So, you're a cultivator? This time, it was Li Yunxin's turn to be surprised. But as surprised as he was, he never thought that everything would be smooth sailing for him. So he only took a step back, a little further away from the 7 brothers and said, I think the evil king has misunderstood. I'm not a cultivator. I'm the same as everyone here, a demon, Ain spirit, but definitely not a human. The 7 brothers in front of him seemed a little confused. They didn't know why Seven Duanjin and the evil king said that Li Yunxin was a cultivator. So they looked at each other and then turned to look at Li Yunxin. At this time the evil king laughed 3 times. You're not a cultivator, how can you see my real eye? As he said this, he waved his hand, and the iron plate that Li Yunxin saw flew out of Seven Duanjin's sleeve and fell into his hand. At the entrance of the cave, Li Yunxin saw that this thing was as tall as him. Right now, when Evil King held it in his hand, it was as if he was holding a slightly larger book. The Evil King took the magic treasure and didn't make any movements, but just shook the real eye. The scene in front of them suddenly changed. They were no longer surrounded by the blazing cavern of the Pitfall Mountain. Instead they were surrounded by a hill. Not only did the scene change, even the season seemed to have changed. It was supposed to be summer. Near the city of Wei the weather was especially hot. But now it suddenly became cool or even slightly cold. Li Yunxin stood beside the 7 brothers, and in front of them was a big green stone. Next to the green stone was a crooked pine tree. The pine needles on the tree were sparse and dark green. The tall evil king and the petite snake stood under the pine tree, and behind them was the endless mountains. Looking at the time, it was dusk. The sun was about to set, casting its last afterglow on this world. The setting sun turned everyone golden, and the leaves in the distance looked even more yellow. This should be somewhere in the north. Li Yunxin couldn't figure out if the evil king really moved them to a place in an instant, or if it was an illusion. If it was an illusion, he was a Taoist priest. Among the 3 types of cultivators, Taoist priest, swordsman, and Taoist priest, the latter was the best at illusion. But even if Li Yunxin mobilized the spiritual power in his body to find the flaw of this illusion, he had no clue. Everything around him was incomparably real, without the slightest trace of artificiality. But if it was a real world, where did the evil king get such supernatural power? It should be caused by the magic treasure in his hand, the real eye? But this scene was inexplicably familiar. But no matter how hard Li Yunxin thought, he couldn't think of where he had seen it before. While he was stunned, the evil king sneered, "You are already in my treasure, don't think of escaping. Let me ask you, you say you are a demon, but how did you see my real eye?" The 7 brothers stood in front of Li Yunxin and were about to speak, but the evil king was already impatient. As if there were only the few of them here, he no longer had the fatherly attitude from before. The great demon of the mysterious realm waved his hand, but he couldn't feel any demonic power or spiritual power. The 7 brothers were stunned as if time had stopped for them. Then the evil king waved his hand again, and the 7 muscular fiendish demons lined up in a row and rolled down the hill. Seeing this scene, Li Yunxin frowned. The snake spirit laughed lightly at the side. "You, flirtatious jade-faced little silver dragon, I'm afraid you still don't know where you gave yourself away. Do you still remember the thing I told you to look at when you entered the door?" There was a hole in that metal plate and in the hole was a black dot. Qi Duanjin looked at Li Yunxin and sneered, I asked you what you saw and you said you saw an eye, it should be a tiger or leopard. But you didn't know, this was the real eye. The demons can only see a black dot, only cultivators that practice Heaven's Will technique can see the real thing. You saw through it with one glance. If it's not a cultivator, what else could it be? As Qi Duanjin said this, the evil king looked at him coldly, waiting to see how Li Yunxin would explain. But the two demons immediately discovered that there was something wrong with the expression on Li Yunxin's face. He didn't look like someone who had fallen into a desperate situation and found out that he had been seen through. He was originally frowning and thinking about something. Hearing Qi Duanjin's words, he frowned and thought for a while, then his eyes suddenly lit up. Then he slowly turned around and carefully looked at his surroundings. After looking for a long time, his face finally revealed a shocked and uncertain expression. But this expression disappeared in a flash. It became even more strange and complicated. The evil king and Qi Duanjin didn't know what that expression meant. Only Li Yunxin himself knew. He ran into a treasure and solved a mystery that had existed in his heart for more than 10 years. It was actually in this place and it was actually this kind of thing. The evil king didn't like his bluff. He glared and said in a low voice, You arrogant fellow, are you still thinking of some escape plan? This king will break your arms and legs, let's see if you'll speak the truth. After saying this, he put his fingers together and pointed at Li Yunxin. With just one finger, Li Yunxin, this dragon son of the true realm, was completely unable to move his arms and legs. Any cultivator would panic in such a situation. Not because he was trapped, but because he couldn't feel any spiritual or demonic energy at all. It was as if his body was suddenly isolated from this world, and he had lost contact with it. But this kind of panic didn't appear on Li Yunxin's face. On the contrary, he turned his eyes to look around, and when he was sure that he really couldn't move, he laughed loudly, Good, 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 good. It really is such a treasure. The evil king ignored him. With a gloomy face, he hooked his finger and pulled Li Yunxin over. He didn't say anything else. He took out a thick broadsword out of nowhere and swung it. With a slashing sound, Li Yunxin was cut into two halves by his saber. He was cut in half at the waist and his lower body fell to the ground. But he still seemed to be restrained and even blood couldn't flow out. The evil king cut him and sneered, Hee, it doesn't hurt or itch, right? Let me tell you, I used a magic weapon to restrain you and cut off your 5 senses. When I get rid of this restraint, I guarantee that you will be in so much pain that you won't be able to live or die. Now, quickly tell me everything in detail. This magic weapon of mine is still here. Maybe I can be merciful and reattach your body. Li Yunxin, on the other hand, only turned her eyes to look at the half of her body that had left him. She chuckled and said, It really doesn't hurt. But, evil king, it might work if you use this method to fool those demon kings under you. If you use it to deal with me, hey. You are a great demon in the mysterious realm, killing me is as easy as flipping your hand. Why did you have to go through the trouble of restraining me and then killing me? Let me guess. Could it be that this place is an illusion to begin with? In fact, you can't do anything here, so you can only use this method of cutting off your 5 senses to scare people? If you ask me, I feel that I am still in the same place as before. The evil king stared at him and spat, Bah! Do you know that this treasure of mine is? But Li Yunxin interrupted him. He looked straight into the evil king's eyes. Listen to me. Listen to me for a while, maybe you will get a surprise. Tiske. Such a treasure is in your hands, but you can only use it to scare people. Don't you think it is a waste? The more 7th Duanjin listened to him, the more he frowned. He pulled the evil king's waist. King, don't listen to his nonsense, he is deceiving you. Li Yunxin sneered again. Nonsense? You used 2 pieces of iron to tie the treasure left by the art saint, exposed it in broad daylight and used it to scare people. Do you really think that you are unfathomable and powerful? As soon as he said this, 7th Duanjin stopped talking. Even the evil king stopped talking. Put me down, Li Yunxin said to the dumbfounded evil king. I originally came to harm you, but now I have changed my mind. Put me down and I might tell you how to use this treasure properly. At this moment, the ruthlessness and awe-inspiring aura on the evil king disappeared. Perhaps Li Yunxin had hit the nail on the head, and he had been thinking about this for a long time, about how to use this treasure properly. Hence, he was stunned for a while before he asked, Do you really know? Misty Nuda Kai Mao is one of the 8 ancient scrolls left behind by the art saint in the past. Li Yunxin glared at him. Don't you think so? The evil king finally subconsciously waved his hand. Hence, Li Yunxin regained his senses. Just as he expected, the cutting off of his 5 senses and being cut in half by the evil king were just an illusion. He still stood on the same spot. He looked around again and let out a long sigh. Misty Nuda Kai Mao, Misty Nuda Kai Mao. So this is what it means, he muttered to himself. What kind of dialect is this? When he was very young, his parents had mentioned this painting when they taught him about the art of painting. It was one of the 8 ancient scrolls left behind by the art saint. Now, it was in the evil king's hands. Chapter 259. Li Yunxin sighs here for a while, but evil king and the snake monster can't bear it anymore. The monster of Shen realm becomes more anxious because the mysterious guy in front of him may know the secret he has been dreaming of. This is totally different from his usual calm attitude in front of other monsters. He stares at Li Yunxin with his eyes wide open, and a thunderous voice comes out of his mouth. Are you a cultivator? Are you a Taoist painter? What do you know? Li Yunxin waves his hand. Don't panic. I'm more surprised than you. Let me think about it first. He paused for a moment and looked at Evil King. I thought that you and old demon Fulu were mortal enemies, and that's why you killed him and gave his 7th child some magic potion to make them your own. I was wrong, wasn't I? Evil King frowns. But Li Yunxin raises his hands and presses them down slightly to comfort him. Okay, let's talk about me first. I'm not a pangolin. I'm indeed a Taoist painter, but that was when I was alive. Now I'm a monster. Here I am. I was planning to sow discord in your Pitfall Mountain and let you go to Dongting to die. If a big monster like you fights with the orthodoxy, they won't be distracted and I can get away easily. But now it seems that I have to reconsider. Li Yunxin thinks for a while. For example, let's be friends. Hearing his words, Evil King and the snake monster look at each other. The snake monster is a little stunned and then she yells, You are, Dragon 9? Because of her words, the setting sun in the background suddenly falls behind the mountains, and the darkness finally comes. A sudden gust of wind blows between heaven and earth. Autumn leaves and dead branches are flying with the wind, as if a giant above the endless sky takes a deep breath. The remaining dark green pine needles on the old pine next to the big blue stone seem to be startled. They all point at Li Yunxin as if thousands of pine needles will be shot at him at any time. The shock and puzzlement on Evil King's face faded away. Because of the snake spirit's words, he no longer treated Li Yunxin as a random mysterious enemy, but as an evenly matched opponent. He let out an oppressive and dull voice from his throat. Longjiu? You sure have guts. How dare you make trouble in my Pitfall Mountain instead of staying in your Dongting? Take this. The moment the great fiendish demon's voice faded, the massive mountain-like figure in the darkness pounced forward. As he pounced, the wild wind between heaven and earth dissipated. It no longer blew aimlessly, but became the violent wind pressure that he brought along. Together with the darkness, it rushed towards Li Yunxin with overwhelming force. The distance between the two of them was only a few steps. This pounce was even faster than a galloping horse. Before the snake spirit beside him could see him clearly, with a loud rumbling sound, the two huge bodies collided into each other. However, the Evil King's momentum was clearly a little more violent. The huge black figure directly blasted Li Yunxin, who was in front of him, several meters away. Everything in their way, the trees, rocks, dust, strong winds, and even the endless darkness in the void, was instantly crushed into powder. Moreover, it shot out countless fierce sparks that resembled a sputtering rainstorm. The Evil King's attack only lasted for an instant. The snake spirit Qi Duanjin did not even have the time to dodge the strong wind created by the two people. The figures of the two great fiendish demons had already separated. So the snake spirit saw the true body of the self-proclaimed, romantic jade-faced little silver dragon. He had already become as tall as the Evil King. His body was covered in a steel-like dark green scale armor. A pair of ferocious and terrifying red antlers grew out of his forehead. On his neck was a steel-like white mane. From between the hair and the scales, there was a large amount of mist that rose up, protecting him within, that delicate and handsome human figure with a slender figure. Right now, he had already revealed his true body, turning into a ferocious-looking fiend god. The snake spirit sucked in a breath of cold air. He really was Dragon Son? He was previously speaking frivolously and acting carelessly. But after such a short moment, he had already emitted a terrifying pressure that made it hard for her to breathe. The snake spirit could not help but take a step back. But then she realized that she should not be like this. But she hesitated for 2 breaths of time and did not dare to take another step forward, because that was dragons. She gritted her teeth and looked at her evil king. When the two of them collided, the scales and carapace fiercely rubbed against each other. The sparks that shot out actually ignited the dry vegetation around them. As a result, she saw the evil king standing like a mountain not far from Li Yunxin, his face flickering with uncertainty in the flickering firelight. And that dragon son was also standing, but there were specks of dark golden blood dripping from his clenched right palm. As soon as it fell to the ground, a cloud of smoke rose up like hot magma. Dragon son grinned, revealing his sharp fangs, and smiled coldly. "Evil king, you have great strength. A great demon in the mysterious realm, you live up to your reputation. Thank you." The evil king did not speak. He was still frowning as if there was something he could not figure out. After a moment of silence, he suddenly raised his head, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "Then, let me experience it again." As soon as he finished speaking, he pounced forward again and collided with Li Yunxin. But this time the snake spirit was prepared. She immediately took out a colorful snake slough and covered herself in it. It turned out that her reaction was correct. A continuous series of explosions and roars immediately rang in her ears. It was as if the world had become a big drum, and the 2 terrible great demons had turned themselves into drumsticks, using all their strength to shake the earth. Boom, boom, boom. The entire land was plowed into the sky by the 2 of them. The sky and the earth were overturned, and then tons of soil and rocks that they had blasted into the sky poured down, burying everything. Then, there was the intertwining of flames and smoke, and the continuous sharp hissing sound almost tore the eardrums. The snake spirit could feel that the magical weapon refined from her snake skin, which she used to protect herself, was being bombarded by the aftermath of the battle between the 2. It was on the verge of collapse, like a small boat drifting on the stormy sea. This is such a terrible power. The battle lasted for a full quarter of an hour. When the snake spirit thought that she was about to die of exhaustion, the world finally returned to peace. She waited for 3 breaths before she dared to push aside the sand and gravel on her body and poked her head out to look. The scene in front of her was no longer what it used to be. The land had turned into black scorched earth, and flames and smoke were rising from it. The world in front of her was like purgatory, and in the midst of the flames and smoke, Dragon Son and the evil king were still opposite each other. But the evil king was still the evil king, and there was not a single injury on his body. But Dragon Son's body was almost plated with a layer of golden light. That was the golden dragon blood. There was still mist rising from between his scales, but the mist had been dyed pale gold. However, he still stood steadily 5 steps away from the evil king and stared at him. Then he laughed again and golden blood dripped from between his fangs. The evil king only said 1 strike, but now it has come so many times. After saying this, he took a step forward unsteadily. Because of this step, his body seemed to have suddenly split open, and the golden dragon blood flowed down from his scales like small streams. "If we keep doing this, we won't be able to be good friends." The evil king still did not speak and only stared at him. The snake spirit frowned, not knowing why her king was so abnormal. But she was not a stupid demon after all. She looked at Li Yunxin and then looked at the evil king. Suddenly she widened her eyes, slightly opened her mouth and stopped talking. She suddenly realized that her king was a demon of the mysterious realm. And this Long Jiu was fighting with a demon of the mysterious realm in the opponent's artifact for a full quarter of an hour, and he could still stand. And this was also what puzzled the evil king. For the first time he held back. It was just to teach this arrogant brat a lesson, and to see if he was really a dragon or not. So the first strike forced Li Yunxin to show his true form. In the end it only scratched his skin. This surprised the evil king. According to the information he got through some channels, this Long Jiu used to be at the peak of the transcendent realm, but now he was at the true realm. But how big was the difference between the true realm and the mysterious realm? Even if he was Long's son, he couldn't. One must know that in the quarter of an hour after that, the evil king still had some strength left. But later, he hadn't met an opponent of his level for almost 1,000 years. The more he fought, the braver he became, the more excited he became. He had already used all his strength. But he didn't kill him? The evil king stared at Li Yunxin for a long time and then said, "What did you do?" Li Yunxin laughed crazily. This laugh made blood flow. "I've said it before. You've obtained this magic treasure, but you're only using it to scare people and identify cultivators. It's a reckless waste of God's gifts. Octave Treasure's ancient scroll. Li Yunxin shook his head. The world's treasure. Those old fools of Daotong and Kenzo will go crazy when they see this thing. You used 2 pieces of iron to clamp it together. You ask me, how can a Yin spirit of the true realm stand in front of you for so long? Aha. Now if I say I know how to use this thing correctly, do you believe me? I'm proficient in the art of painting. In this thing. Although it's your artifact, how do you know how to use the spiritual power in this scroll? But how do you know how to use the spiritual power in this scroll? Li Yunxin narrowed her eyes. If we were outside, that blow of yours might have killed me. But in this scroll, the evil king, this is the home field of us Taoists. The flow of spiritual power, the pull of qi, there are too many things you can't see. The use of this treasure. You don't even know 1 out of 10 million. As he said this, the golden blood on his body was still flowing out. But neither the evil king nor the snake spirit 7 Duanjin had the slightest intention of taking advantage of him. Because he had already used reality to prove what he said. A demon of the true realm, using the opponent's artifact, fought to a draw with a demon of the profound realm. The evil king was silent for a long time and finally said in a low voice, "Then, what do you want?" Li Yunxin finally let out a sigh of relief. He raised his hand and pointed at the snake spirit 7 Duanjin. The evil king and the snake spirit were slightly stunned. Then the evil king frowned. "You want her?" Li Yunxin let out a breath. "Come help me." Then he fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 260. When he woke up, Li Yunxin was in darkness, and he heard the sound of iron rings rubbing against each other. He quickly realized that the sound came from his body. His hands and feet were tied somewhere. He lay on the cold stone floor like a prisoner in a prison. But he didn't immediately get up and didn't speak. Instead, he opened his eyes and stared blankly in the darkness for a while. This feeling wasn't common. It wasn't just referring to being captured or bound. It also included feeling like a person waking up from a dream, feeling limp as if he had really had a big dream. It should be said that he hadn't slept for a long time. But now that he had this experience, it didn't feel bad. Then he tried to break free, but he couldn't. This meant that the thing that bound his body wasn't an ordinary object. Otherwise, if it was just steel, it would just be spider silk in his eyes. The thing on his body shouldn't have been used to bind him. Now that he was in human form, he could vaguely feel that the iron chains were thick, and each ring was as big as a bowl. This thing was just right for a whale. Then light appeared. Somewhere in the void far above his head, there was a hole, which meant that he was in a very deep and wide underground. Using the yellow light, he recognized the figure of the evil king. A huge demon fell from above, and after a while, landed in front of Li Yunxin. The evil king was holding a lamp like a human. But the light of this lamp seemed to be wrapped by some invisible force, and the light couldn't reach more than 5 steps away. Everything within 5 steps could be seen, but beyond 5 steps, it was still dark. The evil king landed in front of Li Yunxin, and silently stared at him for a while. Li Yunxin tried to sit up. He succeeded. There were 4 thick iron chains on his body, coming from somewhere in the darkness, and they almost buried him inside. The iron chains were black in color, and some of the rings were filled with mud, giving off a strong moldy smell. So he smiled. This isn't the way to treat a guest. But the evil king obviously wasn't in the mood to have a friendly conversation with him. The big demon stretched out his hand, and the Octave Treasure's ancient scroll fell in front of Li Yunxin. The iron plate was stabbed into the ground. The evil king pointed at the iron plate and said in a deep voice, "Tell me, how do we use this treasure?" Li Yunxin raised his hands. The evil king frowned slightly, but he still pointed from afar, and the chains binding his right hand fell off and quickly retracted. But there was another sound in the darkness. It sounded like iron chains rubbing against bones. Li Yunxin didn't care about it for the time being. At this moment, all his attention was on the iron plate in front of him. He stood up with some difficulty and pulled the iron plate over with one hand. Then he ran his fingernail along the seam of the 2 pieces of iron, which he pried open. Then his fingers moved along the seam, and the 2 iron plates were separated. Li Yunxin finally saw the true appearance of one of the 8 treasures' ancient scrolls, Misty Nun de Kai Di Mao. And then, his expression froze for an instant. Then he couldn't help but laugh. Because he remembered when he was still a child, living in the mountain village, his parents had talked about this painting in a solemn but ethereal tone. One of the Octave Treasure's ancient scroll, the peak state that Taoists could reach, the world's most precious treasure, and the powerful relic of the art saint. But in fact, almost no one had seen what the art saint's handwriting looked like, At least no one had seen it in the past 1,000 years. At that time, Li Yunxin thought there were probably two reasons. First, the world said that the art saint was possessed by the devil. Since he was possessed by the devil, the less people saw the devil's things, the better it was. Daotong and Kenzo would hide them. Second, it was said that a long time ago, when the art saint was still alive, he didn't easily show his handwriting to others. This was easy to understand. An expert like that was always mysterious and unfathomable. When Ling Kongzi met Li Yunxin at the banquet in Wei City's Cheonghua restaurant, Li Yunxin made a treasure scroll, the perverted eating picture. At that time, Ling Kongzi was moved and asked him if the art saint was still alive, and if he had any relationship with the art saint. And she said that Li Yunxin's painting style was similar to the art saint's. At that time he didn't understand. But now, in this unknown dark room, he was able to see the art saint's authentic work with his own eyes. Many of his previous doubts were answered. Li Yunxin was silent for a while, not knowing what to say. Because this painting was as long as him and half as wide as a person. It was such a huge painting. In fact, the content was only the size of 2 palms. It was like a 5 or 6-year-old child who just learned to doodle, scribbled in a crooked manner. There was a person in the painting. It should be a person. The body was a black line and so were the 4 limbs. The hands were 5 short lines and the head was a circle. There were 2 smaller circles in the circle and there were 2 dots in the middle. This thing should be a person. The person's posture was crooked and the lines were uneven, but it was obvious that he was bending over and raising his fist, as if he was going to hit something. As for what he was hitting a kitty cat. That's right, a kitty cat. It was the kind of white kitty cat with a pink bow on its head that all the little girls at his time liked. In fact, compared to the person, the cat was very well drawn, at least at the level of a 2nd-grade primary school student. The cat's eyes were 2 blackened dots. It was the black dot that was revealed through the hole in the iron plate. A person was on top of the kitty cat and was about to punch her. Beneath them was something that looked like a rock. The stone was on a small hill. The hill was represented by a semicircle. Next to it was something that looked like a tree. Circles of orange paint were drawn in the air. Was that the sun that was about to set? Wu Song hit kitty cat. Li Yunxin stared at this 8 treasures ancient scrolls, with mixed feelings. He stared at it for a long time, not knowing how to comment on it. Now he knew why so few people had seen the handwriting of the art saint. He also knew why the evil king sealed the painting with an iron plate. Was it embarrassing? At the same time he strongly doubted Ling Kongzi's taste. He thought that Ling Kongzi was mocking him, not praising him. At first the evil king looked at him coldly, expressionless. But when Li Yunxin couldn't help laughing, became silent, and then laughed again, he finally shouted at him, "What's so funny? This is an authentic handwriting." In fact, Li Yunxin could understand the psychological state of this profound realm demon. He stopped laughing and comforted him. Okay, I know it's an authentic handwriting. Ah. The evil king seemed to be humiliated and wanted to take the painting away from Li Yunxin. But Li Yunxin hurriedly grabbed the painting and tried to control his expression for 3 breaths. He carefully probed his spiritual power into the painting, trying to understand the flow of spiritual power in it. Soon, his expression became serious and solemn. He held the painting in his hand, his eyes half closed and his brows slightly furrowed. He was silent for a quarter of an hour, then suddenly raised his left hand and waved it, without saying anything. The evil king understood what he meant. At this moment, Li Yunxin looked like a thinker who was extremely absorbed in the painting and had no time to think about the outside world. He wanted him to untie his left hand. The evil king hesitated for a moment, then pointed again. The iron chain on his left hand also fell off. Then Li Yunxin held the painting in her left hand and used her right hand to form a sword and fingers. She traced the hilarious and childish lines in the air extremely slowly, following the strokes of the brush. It was as if every movement required all her strength. In just 2 breaths he was sweating profusely. His finger first fell on one of the man's arms. The arm was only the length of a finger. But Li Yunxin's finger only moved half the length of an arm and then fell down. He suddenly raised his head and panted, as if his body had been pressed thousands of meters under the sea for hundreds of years, and now he could finally rise to the surface and breathe again. He stared at the evil king, then at the painting. His face was covered in sweat and he murmured in surprise, "How could this be?" His father had told him when he taught him the art of painting. Those paintings with extremely high realms and profound ideas were not easily seen by ordinary people, or even cultivators with low realms. If they tried to comprehend it, the spiritual power in the painting might backfire, and people with insufficient cultivation would pay a terrible price. But Li Yunxin had never seen the treasure his father talked about, until he saw this thing. In ordinary paintings, there were meridians of spiritual power flowing in it, like the meridians of the human body, extending in all directions. If he followed the meridians, there would always be traces. But in this painting, the meridians could not be called lines. Countless complicated and indescribable spiritual power flowed and overlapped, forming a dense space. If the traces in the paintings he saw were all lines, then the lines in this painting were already woven into cloth. He tried to find a thread to follow, but even if he put all his energy into it, he could not follow it for long. Instead, he was quickly wrapped up, almost falling into it and suffering from the backfire. At this time he finally realized, this was indeed the relic of the art saint. It was a painting that had far surpassed his understanding of the great Tao of painting. Every trace of spiritual energy was integrated into the world. The painting was no longer a simple painting but a part of the world. The childish lines in the painting were just the surface. The painter's realm was so high that he had completely broken away from the realm of using images to represent the image. And this casual scene on the painting was proof of the painter's fearsomeness. Li Yunxin stood rooted to the ground for a long time, unable to speak. When he was in Xianghua Tower, he also painted a painting of eating. The painters present all thought that he was being improper, but that improper painting was actually a treasure. Now he also understood how the painters felt at that time. At that time he was really despicable. What an arrogant art saint. Seeing him like this, Evil King glared at him and said in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Li Yunxin did not answer him immediately. Instead he thought for a while and then casually threw the painting to Evil King. Evil King was slightly stunned. He did not expect Li Yunxin to return the treasure like this after he received it with his own hands, without any reluctance. "What are you suppressing here?" After another 2 breaths, Li Yunxin raised his head and asked him seriously. Chapter 261. The expression on Evil King's face froze for a moment, but then he relaxed. Li Yunxin knew that the dullness meant that he had asked the right question. This place was suppressing something. The subsequent relaxation meant that Evil King believed that he could understand the painting and was not just spouting nonsense. The demon put on a stern face and said gruffly, "You can tell?" Li Yunxin thought about it and said, "I can't completely understand the meaning of this painting, but I can see something. I don't know the specific spiritual power composition, but this painting is used to suppress demons. It has the meaning of subduing the dragon and the tiger." He looked around in the darkness and said, "What is suppressed? Does it need the octave ancient scroll?" Evil King was a bit impatient and said, "This is not something you should care about." Li Yunxin said with a serious face, "I can't communicate with a layman like you. If you want me to teach you how to use this treasure, I need to understand it first. For example, I need to know what this thing is used to suppress, then I can use it to figure out what it is used for. Think about it carefully. Do you want to tell me or not?" It had been a long time since someone dared to talk to Evil King like this. Moreover, Evil King was not the kind of person who would say, "Hey, he's being rude to me, what a special feeling." Thus, when he heard Li Yunxin's words, he wanted to vent his anger. But he was a demon who had lived for many years and knew that this dragon's son had this kind of arrogance, not to mention that he had some secrets. He suppressed his anger in the bottom of his heart and made up his mind to get what he wanted from Li Yunxin's mouth, and then teach him a good lesson. But even so, it took him a long time to make a decision. He held the lamp in his hand and thought for a while in the darkness, then subconsciously looked into the darkness. Only then did he frown and snort viciously, "Fine. Fine, I'll let you see. But if you see, don't think about leaving." As he said that, he raised his hand. Li Yunxin stopped him and said, "Wait a moment. Let me ask you first, where are we now?" The Diablo looked at him sinisterly and smiled. "As for where it is, it's at the bottom of this pitfall mountain." Li Yunxin thought for a moment and subconsciously blurted out, "Bottomless pit?" Pitfall Mountain and Bottomless Pit were the dwellings of demons and monsters in a supernatural novel in his previous world. At this moment he also subconsciously raised it, but unexpectedly the Evil King was stunned again. Then he carefully looked at Li Yunxin, and his expression became solemn. "You know quite a lot." After saying this, he took a few steps with the lamp in his hand, causing the ground to tremble. Then he looked at Li Yunxin again. "I don't know where you got all this information from. But, since that was the case, there was no way he could get out. I'll give you this first. In the future, if I stay here with you, I'll have to interrogate him bit by bit. After that, he ignored Li Yunxin and raised the lamp high. Some kind of restriction on the lamp suddenly disappeared, and the light instantly spread out. This small lamp actually illuminated the entire underground cave. This bottomless pit turned out to be terrifyingly big. The evil king's pitfall mountain could be considered to have occupied a large area. But now that Li Yunxin saw it, the bottomless pit at the bottom of the pitfall mountain was many times bigger than the pitfall mountain. He was a great demon of the true realm, his eyesight was extremely good. But even he could see the edge of the cave. As far as his eyes could see, he could only see the darkness at the end. But the cave itself wasn't eye-catching. It was the thing behind Li Yunxin. The first thing he saw was the toe. But there was no flesh on the toe, only white bone. The white bone of this toe was as tall as Li Yunxin. The problem was that the phalanx of the foot wasn't alone, it was connected to the instep of the foot. The instep of the foot was also white bone, it was already like a small mountain. Above the instep of the foot was the leg bone, it was like a towering tree. Li Yunxin slightly opened his mouth, looked up, and realized that it was an incomparably huge skeleton. It looked like a human skeleton, but the number of bones wasn't right, there were more. There were terrifying bone spurs growing on the bones like a thistle forest. But even the smallest bone spur on the skeleton was taller than Li Yunxin. The skeleton half knelt on the ground, its two arms stretched out to the sides, bound by countless thick iron chains. Li Yunxin realized that he was bound by a few of the countless iron chains. The huge head of the skeleton was lowered, its black eye sockets looked down from the hundreds of meters high hole, as if it was looking down at the two people below it. It looked like this thing was trapped here when it was alive, its arms were bound, stretched, and hung somewhere above, then it was killed. So it maintained this posture and was still hanging here after death. However, countless iron chains, which were as thin as hair compared to the skeleton, bound it tightly and fixed it in place. Compared to it, the evil king and Li Yunxin were like two ants compared to a tall adult human. Li Yunxin sucked in a breath of cold air. What is this thing? It was really too big. If it was still alive and standing up, it could be clearly seen from 100 miles away, right? The evil king was very satisfied to see such a scene. Long Jiu, who always seemed to be calm and confident, was stunned by this thing. He sneered, "I can't let you know this kind of thing. You just need to know that this is what the ancient scroll is suppressing. Now do you understand?" Li Yunxin looked at this huge thing and after a while he was able to speak. Because huge things were always shocking, especially for people like him. Especially for someone like him, his deepest memories almost all belonged to another world. And in that world, many principles were clear. People could easily judge what was possible and what was impossible. That was a rational world. But at this moment, when the rational Li Yunxin saw this thing, even in this mystical world, it was considered the most mystical among the mystical, right? He had never seen any records about it in the ancient books. So he was silent for a long time and he was thinking about something in his mind. The Art Saint, the ancient scroll. The group of demons created by the Art Saint. And the background story of these demons. Suppression, huge bones. These clues were connected together. Thinking about the background story again? Why did he leave such a background? The painting of Wu Song angrily beating Hello Kitty was in fact a horribly complicated masterpiece. It was not as shallow and childish as it looked. So, all the things that the Art Saint did here, was it not as it looked like, just something that guy did because he was bored? A bold idea suddenly jumped out of Li Yunxin's mind. So he was silent for a while and turned around. "Evil King, how long have I been unconscious?" The evil king was once again surprised by Li Yunxin's attitude. In fact, this feeling of surprise had always been there. It was like, you see a stranger as an enemy and he behaved like an enemy to you. But that stranger was like Li Yunxin, repeatedly talking to you in a calm manner, no matter what you were planning in your heart. This Li Yunxin at this moment was like chatting with a friend, calmly asking him, "How long have I been unconscious?" It should be noted that he was imprisoned here, and such a secret was revealed to him. Where did he get his calmness and courage? It was like, this world was just a big dream to him. A strange feeling arose in the evil king's heart. He had never felt such an emotion before. And this emotion made him more curious about Li Yunxin, and even temporarily diluted the hostility in his heart. So he thought for a while and reluctantly answered, "Just 4 hours." Li Yunxin thought for a while and looked like he was a little relieved. Then he said in a serious and solemn tone, "The previous question, I thought you killed old demon Fulu and tricked his 7 sons to work for you, but in fact things are not like that, right?" I want to know the inside story. Li Yunxin's tone became softer. His expression also seemed to be softer. This made the evil king's heart give birth to a strange feeling. This feeling made his heart tremble a little. It was as if he had eaten delicious food when he was extremely hungry, filling up the empty part of his body. He stared at Li Yunxin and shook his head in confusion. What kind of sorcery is this? Li Yunxin was stunned. Huh? The big demon stared at him and subconsciously patted his chest. The hard fist hit the carapace on his chest, making a metallic sound. Here, the demon didn't know how to describe this feeling. Seeing Li Yunxin's expression, he felt that he was thinking too much, but what the hell is going on? Li Yunxin looked at him and suddenly smiled in understanding. It's probably my charm, he said softly. Because he was seriously injured, his voice was a little hoarse. But it was more magnetic. It's not your fault that you like a beautiful and gentle person like me. As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved it in front of the evil king's face. The evil king was a little dazed again. Then he heard Li Yunxin say, "What is the truth?" The evil king stared at Li Yunxin for a while, blinking his eyes. Then he let out a low sigh and actually began to speak. That old demon Fulu? I didn't kill him. In fact, you've already seen him. That's him. As he spoke, he pointed behind Li Yunxin, and as if he was afraid that Li Yunxin would misunderstand, he added, "Those iron chains are him. Old demon Fulu's true body is a gourd vine. After a long time he became a cultivator. He also formed 7 gourds on his vine. My 7 adopted sons were born from him." Li Yunxin interrupted, "These? Did he tell you this or did you see it with your own eyes?" The evil king blinked. "What? I mean, you saw him cultivate from a gourd vine and become a human?" Chapter 262. Diablo was slightly taken aback, then he frowned. "How can I see it with my own eyes? I only remember it. How can anyone see it with their own eyes 2,000 years ago?" "What about you?" Li Yunxin asked gently. "It is said that a pangolin dug through a mountain to release you. You are a great demon, but do you remember yourself before you achieved Tao? Or were you before?" Diablo was stunned for a moment. "What? I mean, for example, your true body is a scorpion. You achieved Tao and gained human form. Do you remember what happened before you took human form?" But Diablo was stunned for a moment again. "What?" His tone and expression were exactly the same as before. Li Yunxin stared at him in silence for a while, then he understood. This is the background story. Diablo and old demon Fulu were both created demons. They remembered their origins, but when he asked about what happened before, then they froze. Mrs. Sanwa's current body was also created by herself. But the difference between her and them was probably that the soul that possessed her body was not created. That's why such a situation didn't happen? He didn't ask anymore and only asked Diablo to continue. Sure enough, the great demon's stunned expression disappeared. He continued. After old demon Fulu gave birth to his 7 sons, something big happened one day. There was a pangolin that achieved Tao, and its nature was to randomly drill underground. Later that thing befriended old demon Fulu and came to my place as a guest. That pangolin couldn't stay idle, so it dived underground again. In the end, just like that, a disaster happened. Diablo frowned slightly as he spoke, as if those things really happened and were still vivid in his mind. Then this thing came out. He pointed at the huge skeleton behind Li Yunxin. This thing is a prehistoric old demon. It was originally hibernating underground. It was awakened by that pangolin and came out to wreak havoc. We were at a disadvantage when we fought against him, and we were in a precarious situation. Old Devil Fulu's 7 children were also captured by him and placed in a pill furnace to be refined into magic treasures. Alas, what would happen if he refined it into a magic treasure? Diablo sighed and said, "That old demon Fulu also has a treasure called the Rainbow Lotus. He and I snuck into the lair of the primitive old demon and took out the 7-colored lotus seed pod. The lotus seed pod sucked his 7 children in and instantly turned into a huge mountain, suppressing the primitive old demon. Old demon Fulu's magic treasure is a dual cultivator with his life. He knows that his lifespan is almost up. Then he turned into countless iron vines and bound the old devil once more. Only then, did we kill him." Li Yunxin listened quietly, then thought for a moment and said, "But this thing is so big there are no records of it. This area has been inhabited since 2,000 years ago. However, there were no rumors about it in the secular world. This matter is also remembered by you?" Diablo widened his eyes. Of course I remember, of course it is true. But according to what you said, the 7 children of old demon Fulu were lured in and turned into a mountain to suppress the primitive old demon. Why are they still fine now? Diablo sighed. Of course they came out from the mountain after being suppressed. He raised his hand and pointed above. My Pitfall Mountain used to be a mountain formed by them. After they came out, the mountain became hollow. But it's a pity. They don't know what happened back then. I didn't want to say it either, but now they think that I am the one who harmed old demon Fulu. Li Yunxin stared at him for a while and realized that he was speaking the truth. He didn't ask any more, because he was afraid that something bad would happen if he asked. At this point he felt that he understood some things. The huge skeleton behind him was definitely not what Diablo said, that the pangolin came out from the ground. According to the background story, the one that came out was Diablo. But Art Saint seemed to have used other methods to fine-tune the plot. Li Yunxin thought that Art Saint did so many seemingly pointless things here to suppress the skeleton. He first suppressed it, then made some demons to guard it. As for why there was a background story, and fake memories, he felt that this might be a key point. This was the key point of this matter, and also the key point of the painting path he was currently cultivating. According to his current thinking, it was probably related to wish power, or something like that. But he didn't dare to speculate or deduce the key point, because the painting had truly shocked him. He used to think that he was a genius with extremely high ability and comprehension, and his understanding of painting path was also considered to be at the top of the world. But after seeing the ruins of Art Saint, he realized that he was just a frog in a well. Because of this he didn't ask any more. But the problem was that even if Diablo was created, he was still a great demon with extremely high cultivation. He originally came to harm him. But after seeing this painting he changed his mind, and planned to trick it into his hands. But now that he knew so many things he changed his mind again. He didn't dare to take this painting anymore. Who knew what would happen if he took the painting away, and whether the terrifying skeleton behind him would come back to life? Who knew what kind of terrifying thing that skeleton was? This world was too mysterious and there were too many secrets. In the past he had an incomparable sense of superiority towards this world. But more and more things were slowly wearing away his original playful heart. Now he gradually realized that he seemed to be in a trap. And the trap was set up by the most terrifying group of people in this world. They began to wrestle with each other a long time ago. The visible and invisible, the sound and the silent war began thousands of years ago, and it had yet to end. He was involved in this trap from the moment he was born, and now he was becoming more and more important in the trap. But this also meant that he was sinking deeper and deeper. Li Yunxin sighed. Okay. Maybe what you said is true. It sounds like you're not a bad guy. Let's make a deal. I'll teach you how to use the ancient scroll and you let me go, okay? The evil king blinked and thought for a while. He was hesitating. And the reason why he was hesitating was because of Li Yunxin. In fact, from the moment he saw this big demon, Li Yunxin had been trying to influence him. It should have been in vain. He didn't know this demon very well and the demon was very cautious. But then the evil king put him into the painting. For a painting Taoist priest, the painting was his home field. He was the successor of the Art Saint. Although there was a world of difference between his realm and the mysterious saints, some principles were still the same. When they were talking he couldn't see the flaws in the environment, but it was different when they were fighting fiercely. The environment in the painting was transformed from the true meaning of the painting. He and the evil king plowed the land upside down, and the chi in the painting was affected. The environment in the painting had to be repaired, and it wouldn't always be that dilapidated. And when the chi moved there were traces to follow. For an ordinary Taoist painter, finding the flow of chi in such a complicated painting, using it and influencing it was a task as difficult as ascending to the heavens. But Li Yunxin wasn't one of those painting Taoist priests, who had withered and were kept by Daotong or Kenzo. In the midst of the battle, he had found certain routes of spiritual power flow and used them. Over there, using them meant that he could control the world in the painting, to a certain extent. This was also the reason why, as a true realm demon, he was able to survive the all-out attack of the evil king, who was in the profound realm. But at the same time he did something else, something he was best at. He also used the chi in the painting to influence the evil king's consciousness during the battle, but he couldn't do it perfectly at that time. But it was enough to plant a seed in his heart. When he woke up and found himself in the darkness, he was secretly happy. And when the evil king appeared with a lamp, the environment was dim and the light was dancing. This was one of the two things he loved the most. In such an environment, facing someone who already had a seed in his heart, he could do a lot of things. For example, now. If Li Yunxin had made such a request 2 hours ago, the evil king would have snorted and laughed at him for being whimsical. But now the evil king had hesitated for a long time. The dragon's son in front of him made him experience a strange emotion. This emotion was gradually washing away the hostility in his heart, making his will more and more shaky. He even thought, what if I let him go? This dragon's son looked very gentle, and his words were also gentle, like a person who would keep his promise. If he talked to him properly, he didn't have any grudges with the dragons, he wouldn't necessarily harm him, and maybe they could become good friends. As for other people, other things, what did it matter? So the evil king's eyes finally softened. He thought for a moment and said, I don't have any grudges with you. If someone didn't tell me that you might come here to trick me, we wouldn't be like this. If you promise me that you won't tell anyone about this ancient scroll and teach me how to use this treasure, I will let you go. Maybe we can be friends in the future. It's also a good thing to drink and have fun. Li Yunxin smiled and nodded, okay. I promise you. But you have to untie my feet first. The evil king didn't hesitate this time. He stretched out his hand and pointed at Li Yunxin's feet, and the iron chain was untied. So he sighed softly. This iron chain was really something. When he was locked just now, he couldn't even run his wagon smoothly. He really didn't know what it was made of. Was it really the incarnation of the old demon Fulu? But now he didn't want to pursue these things, he just wanted to get away as soon as possible. It had been almost a day since he left Dongting. He had to go back as soon as possible. Otherwise, someone would be anxious. But at this time, suddenly a deep, thunderous sound rang out above their heads. Chapter 263. It was because of this sound that Evil King suddenly frowned. Li Yunxin cursed in her heart. This is bad. But the second loud sound came immediately. This time the sound was louder and the vibration was more violent. Even their feet were trembling slightly. Evil King was dazed for a while, and suddenly his eyes widened. You actually tricked me? He woke up from the hypnotic state just now. It was originally just an emergency measure. Li Yunxin couldn't treat him like a patient, and he didn't have enough time to complete the act with the other party's cooperation. What he had been doing was to carefully guide and amplify the other party's emotions. But today's sudden situation had pulled Evil King's attention away, and he got rid of Li Yunxin's control. Li Yunxin sighed, smiled bitterly, and slowly raised his hands. Evil King's magic is great, I obviously failed. As soon as he finished speaking, the third roar came. Evil King stared at him again, looked up, and waved his hand. Then there was a little light above them. It was the hole he came in from. A figure appeared in the hole. My king, someone outside is challenging you. The voice sounded familiar. It seemed to be the snake spirit, Seven Duanjin. Who is it? Why is there such a big commotion? The snake spirit hesitated for a moment and said, he calls himself Hatred. Evil King was slightly stunned and turned to look at Li Yunxin. But he found that Li Yunxin's face was also surprised. But at this moment, Evil King knew that this guy was very cunning, and it was hard to tell whether this expression was fake or not. Hatred. If it was really hatred, it meant that he was the big brother of this guy in front of him. Evil King had never seen Hatred, but he had heard of his name for a long time. He looked at Li Yunxin fiercely and said in a deep voice, Good Dragon Jiu, you actually played a trick of inside and outside, huh? Li Yunxin was silent. He felt that Hatred should come for him. But the problem was, Hatred was not necessarily hatred. The first time he met his brother was by Dongting Lake. On that day he had just killed Yunzi and cheated back the translucent jade slip from Kunwazi and Lord Dongting. Then Hatred shows up with a dragon token, claiming that he is entrusted by the dragon to come to Dongting to do something. Hatred's human appearance looked honest and mighty, but Li Yunxin still remembered. After the sky turned dark, his temperament suddenly changed. He even started to refer to himself as this young master. That was the 9th young master's favorite nickname. Since then, Hatred had disappeared without a trace, but now he suddenly appeared. That guy, if he really came for him, how did he know that he was in Pitfall Mountain? His momentary silence made the Evil King think that he was feeling guilty. Don't think that I'm afraid of you dragons. Humph, that Dongting Lake has inhibition formations, but do you think my Pitfall Mountain doesn't have any? I've been guarding the Pitfall Mountain for 2,000 years and it's like an iron bucket. He points up while sneering, even if the dragon comes here, it will take him half a day to break this inhibition formation. Li Yunxin thinks for a while and spreads out his hands. You misunderstood me. He is not here to save me, he is here to kill me. If you don't believe me, we can go up and confront him outside. Or we can ask him to come in and confront him. You know I am telling the truth." When Li Yunxin lied to him, the evil king believed him. But now no one believed him when he told the truth. The evil king looks up and laughs. "Do you think I'm stupid? Ask him to come in? If you wish. But if you want to confront him, I will ask you to confront him. Have a good fight." At this moment, the big demon in the mysterious realm has almost lost his mind. He held a monster's blood feast, but Dragon Sun showed up. Dragon Sun knew so many of his secrets, and Dragon Sun almost fooled him into letting him go. Now that he has just woken up, this guy's big brother came to bully him. These dragons are really arrogant. Do they think they can come and go as they please? Li Yunxin frowns and waves his hand. "Evil king, you don't have to be like this. I was forced to deceive you just now. It would be better if he didn't say deceive and deceive." Hearing these two words, the anger in the evil king's heart becomes even stronger. He has never been deceived like this before. Once this accident is over and I really let Dragon Sun go, it will be a great humiliation to me. So he takes 2 deep breaths and sneers. "Deceive me? I will let you have a taste of this." After saying this, he pounces forward and grabs Li Yunxin's throat. Li Yunxin doesn't move, letting him do whatever he wants. He only says in a hoarse voice, "Sai, why do you have to do this? You are the enemy of us dragons?" When the evil king heard him say, "Us dragons," he is even more certain of his thoughts. He doesn't want to talk nonsense with him anymore. His fingers move randomly, casting some kind of magical power. An iron chain stretches out from the huge skeleton and wraps around Li Yunxin's head. But the iron chain disappears in an instant. Li Yunxin finds that he can't speak. The iron chain seems to have sunk into his body, not only making him unable to speak, but also restraining his joints. When the evil king moves his hand, he also moves like a marionette. The evil king takes a step back and looks at Li Yunxin proudly, sneering. I will let you have a taste of this." After saying this, he swings his arm and takes Li Yunxin up into the air. When they arrive at the hall of the Pitfall Mountain, they find that it is already a mess. The braver demon kings are crowding around the cave entrance, while the less courageous demons are running around. But the demons of the Pitfall Mountain know that there are restrictions on the mountain, and it seems to be orderly. When the demons see the evil king, they start to clamor. But the evil king only sneers and doesn't say anything. He takes Li Yunxin and strides towards the exit. The demons obediently make way for them. When the evil king walks past, they follow behind him like a swarm of bees. These demons are stupid. When the evil king isn't here, they are afraid, but when the evil king is here, they throw their fear to the back of their minds and only want to watch the show. When they are about to reach the exit, the evil king waves his hand. Li Yunxin is restrained by him, walking stiffly beside him. After a dozen more steps, they can see the situation outside. The sky is already dark. But although the sky is dark, the scenery is not dark. This was because the Pitfall Mountain was enveloped in a layer of 7-colored light, illuminating a large area nearby. In this light, a tall man wearing a golden crown and a yellow robe stands a dozen steps away from the cave entrance. He stands with his hands clasped behind his back, staring into the cave. When he sees Li Yunxin and the evil king, he squints his eyes fiercely, then grits his teeth and smiles. Good brother, good friend, you really are here." But Li Yunxin can't say anything, so he can only show a smile on his face. The evil king and he stop at the cave entrance, staring at each other from afar. The demons behind them are still clamoring, but the evil king stares at the man for a while, then shouted, "Don't be noisy." The demons immediately become silent, not making a sound. Seeing the evil king's imposing manner, the man also stares at him, then smiles at Li Yunxin. But this smile is not from gritting his teeth. Instead, it is sweet, as if he has missed him for a long time and now he finally sees him. Looking at his smile, Li Yunxin knew what kind of smile it was. It was like a pervert who had finally caught his prey and was about to torture him. Then he would pick up a sharp knife and slice the meat off his body bit by bit with a smile. Li Yunxin knew what kind of smile he was going to make. Hatred smiles like this, then said, Good. I was worried that you would sneak into the Pitfall Mountain, get caught and hurt by this old demon. Now that I see that you are unharmed, I can finally breathe a sigh of relief." "My good brother, good friend," Hatred stares at Li Yunxin, "you and I were going to work together to destroy this Pitfall Mountain, but now I can't come in. What should I do?" At this point, Li Yunxin feels that he can confirm his identity. Under the appearance of Dragon Sun Hatred, there is another person. Although he doesn't know how or why, but he knows, The person who is talking to me now is the ninth young master. It is the ninth young master. In this world there is probably no one who knows the ninth young master better than me. At that time he was trying to survive carefully, and the ninth young master is an insurmountable and dangerous factor for him. He must, with all his attention and all his energy, cater to him, observe him, guess at him. Through his words and actions he can infer his heart, character, and predict his movements. Then he will rack his brains and use everything he knows to lead him into a dead end. Because of this, he knows that this is the familiar ninth young master. Your enemy always knows you the best. Therefore he knows what this person is thinking now. This evil king is angry at me for playing with his emotions, and now he wants to take revenge. Therefore he controls me and wants to return the same trick to me. But evil king's hatred, how can it be compared with the ninth young master? There is probably no one in this world who has a stronger idea than the ninth young master about giving him a taste of his own medicine. Evil king sneered when he heard the words of the ninth young master in hatred's body. He squinted at Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin can read the meaning in his eyes. It is nothing more than as I expected. Li Yunxin also smiled. He doesn't want to talk at all. Evil king looks at hatred again. Hey, we are working together from the inside. You think too highly of yourself. But you don't know that your ninth brother has already turned to me, right? You stupid worm, don't you use your brain to think about it? Pitfall Mountain is only hundreds of miles away from Dongting Weishui River, and we have been neighbors for thousands of years. Which one is closer? Today I will tell you, it is your ninth brother and I who set you up. Hatred is not annoyed at his words at all. He smiles sinisterly. Closer? You are closer to my real ninth brother, aren't you? You ask the person beside you. Is he Long Jiu or a cultivator named Li Yunxin? Chapter 264. Li Yunxin was happy to see the two quarreling. Hearing the ninth young master's words, he showed a hint of surprise on his face. But in front of evil king, the ninth young master's words made him believe it. Hatred said that the person beside him was a cultivator. He had thought so for a long time. If he wasn't a cultivator, how would he know how to use the ancient scroll in his hand? How could he activate the spiritual power in the scroll? As a great monster king of the mysterious realm, it was the first time for him to quarrel with a human. Now that he caught a glimpse of the slightly panicked expression on the face of this Dragon 9, he felt even more delighted. Suddenly he felt that it was more interesting not to kill him immediately, but to make him more and more frightened. It was a new world that he had never experienced before. So he opened his mouth and said, "You think I don't know? Not only is he a cultivator, but he is also a Taoist painter. Hey, your ninth brother has told me everything. If I don't tell you, how can I find your weakness and take your life?" When he said these words, the ninth young master was slightly stunned. He looked at Li Yunxin and then at Evil King and didn't say anything for a long time. Evil King saw his expression and knew that he believed it. Since he believed it, he had achieved his goal. He turned to look at Li Yunxin and then showed a happy smile. He whispered, "I was wondering why you like to lie to people. It turns out that you are so happy. It's a pity that I am happy now, but you are crying. If your brother believes me, guess how he will treat you later?" Li Yunxin blinked. Evil King laughed again. "I don't know where you come from. You are the son of Shinryu, the fake dragon son. But since you call each other brothers and are dragons, hey, I don't want to kill you with my own hands. It will be troublesome if the old dragon comes to find trouble with me. Now, someone actually delivered himself to my door to do this for me. I'll throw you out and watch you brothers kill each other." He stopped laughing and suddenly raised his eyebrows. He said fiercely, "That's what's more enjoyable." As soon as he finished speaking, Li Yunxin suddenly felt his body lighten. The restraints on his joints had been removed. But his mind was still numb and his mouth could not speak. The evil king didn't let him speak. He raised his hand as if he was going to throw Li Yunxin out. However, Li Yunxin took a step back and leaned against the stone wall, quickly carving a few words with his finger. The evil king did not want to see what he had written. He had experienced this person's methods before. He didn't even know what method he used or when he used it, but he almost fell into his trap. How could he not be careful? Therefore he activated his divine ability and reached out to grab Li Yunxin again, and was about to throw him away. However, although he did not want to see it, the words were right behind Li Yunxin. The engraving was deep and large, but it still came into view. The evil king glanced at it, and was shocked. Because he saw that what Li Yunxin had engraved was, "You have a spy here." He was slightly stunned. The evil king was not a stupid demon. If he was stupid, Li Yunxing's method of deceiving him would not work. It always needed a smart person to think more so that he could play tricks. So when he saw this word, his heart skipped a beat. He had previously known some things about this Dragon 9 through some information channels. For example, he was now in the true state. When the person who gave him the information told him those things, he was skeptical. Today, when he saw Li Yunxing with his own eyes, he knew that it was true. But the problem was that the information was true, and the person might not be trustworthy. Now that he saw Li Yunxing engraving such words and his anxious expression, he could not help but hesitate. He saw that Li Yunxing kept blinking as if he had something to say. So he weighed the two choices of throwing it out now and listening for a while. Finally, he waved his hand and removed the seal in Li Yunxing's mouth. He heard Li Yunxing immediately say in a deep voice, "You have a spy here. That hatred outside is indeed here to seek revenge. If you didn't have a spy here, how would he know my whereabouts?" When Li Yunxing said this, he meant it. This was indeed the question in his heart. But on the other hand, he really needed the evil king to remove the seal in his mouth so that he could deal with the upcoming situation. However, his sincere words were taken as an excuse by the evil king. The great demon sneered, "I was wondering what you wanted to say. So it's this. Hey, how would you know? Think about it in your next life." After saying this, he suddenly threw Li Yunxing. Suddenly, a hole appeared in the misty seven-colored light at the cave entrance. Li Yunxing was thrown out like a rock by him, and the colorful light closed up immediately. After a breath, Li Yunxing stood firm on the ground. He was only 3 steps away from hatred. The 9th young master stared at him like a poisonous snake, revealing a dangerous smile. Hatred was a demon in the mysterious realm, which was even higher than the evil king. Therefore he was not worried that the person in front of him would escape from his hands. And this Li Yunxing seemed to know that he had nowhere to escape. He sighed slightly and stood still. The 9th young master smiled, clasped his hands behind his back and walked around him. Then he came to the front of him and looked him up and down carefully, saying, "What a good little man. Who would have thought that it would be like this? When I saved you that night, you were like a drowning dog. Who would have thought that a few months later, you would actually kill this young master?" He stretched out a finger and scratched Li Yunxing's face. But the body of dragons was strong, so it only left a few white marks on his face. "TSK, you have a beautiful face. But your heart is too bad. Now you are in my hands. Tell me, what should I do with you?" After saying this, he narrowed his eyes. This was one of the expressions that the 9th young master liked. And this expression meant that some dangerous emotion was about to break out, and then there might be a storm. Li Yunxing knew him well. So he also knew that the 9th young master who had been hurt by him was willing to tell him the truth. So he sighed softly, "If I say I don't want to, you won't believe me. Do you remember when I asked you to find trouble with Ling Kongzi by the Wei River? At that time, I did remember for a moment the many things you did for me, and I didn't want to hurt you." The 9th young master narrowed his eyes and grinned, showing his fangs. And then, Li Yunxing raised his head and stared at him, "You told me that you ate Missine alive." The 9th young master was stunned. He blinked a few times and looked at Li Yunxing. After a while, he suddenly got close to him, almost touching his nose, because of a person? Li Yunxing didn't dodge but looked back at him. "I told you before, 9th young master. I told you that Lu Laodao was my friend and I told you not to eat him. But Missine was also my friend and you ate her, I told you before. If you really treat me as a friend, why did you eat my friend?" The 9th young master looked at him in disbelief. After a while, he suddenly turned around and walked away, then turned back. "How would I know? You have so many human friends. This person is also your friend, and that person is also your friend. How would I know? If you didn't tell me, how would I know?" His tone gradually became hurried, and in the end, he was almost roaring in a low voice. Fine scales appeared on his cheeks and his body began to emit a light red mist. But the mist was hot, like the air of fire. But Li Yunxing was still calm. He looked at the 9th young master's face for a while, and then turned to look at the entrance of the pitting mountain not far away. The demons and the evil king were still there, watching with great interest. They were just watching, but they didn't seem to hear what they were talking about. They just stretched their necks and their faces were full of excitement. Maybe the 9th young master didn't want others to hear their conversation, so he used some magical power. He was silent for a while and then said, "So that's the problem." He looked at the 9th young master seriously. "If I don't tell you, you won't know. But I can't tell everyone everything. You see people as pigs, dogs, and ants and you eat them. And I was also a human at that time. So, we were not suitable from the beginning. The ninth young master was furious. He stared at Li Yunxin and shouted angrily, "It's you, you said you wanted to be my friend." He was so angry that dense scales covered his whole face. His body expanded in an instant, almost revealing his god-fiend body. But his godly demon body was the godly demon body of hatred, different from Long Jio's. He was golden. Dazzling golden scales covered his entire body, and an even more brilliant golden mane covered his neck and back. Even his horns were dazzling, but they weren't coral antlers, they were two sharp horns like swords pointing straight to the sky. He stood in front of Li Yunxin like a giant beast, and from his nostrils red and thick clouds of fire, Li Yunxin's hair began to burn in the fire clouds. But he didn't seem to feel the pain. He looked up at the ninth young master and said word by word, "Yes. I said I wanted to be your friend first. But I lied to you. I lied to you and I don't feel good in my heart. So, for the sake of our past friendship, I advise you, leave quickly. The evil king and I have set up a big formation in the Pitfall Mountain. You can't do anything to me. And the me standing in front of you now is the real body of my soul. My real body is still in the Pitfall Mountain. Just now, I asked the evil king to let me come out and say these words to you because of our friendship. You killed the me in front of you and I only lost some of my cultivation. But you may not be able to escape. Don't tell me you want to die again?" Li Yunxin once again stabbed his heart with a sharp knife. So, the big demon in front of him finally lost all his senses, and became completely and madly angry. He didn't say anything and suddenly raised his hand and hit Li Yunxin's skull. With a bang, the body in front of him turned into a pile of meat. Chapter 265. The demons in the cave couldn't hear what the two were talking about. But when they saw that hatred was getting angrier, they knew that things weren't going well. However, sympathy was a very rare thing for the demons. Therefore, when they saw the scene in front of them, they were stunned for a moment before they burst into thunderous cheers. Dragons killing each other. How many people could witness such a scene? Even the evil king was slightly stunned. He originally thought that the two might turn against each other, but who knew that they would really turn against each other, and Long Air really killed Long Jio without hesitation. After a moment of shock, he also laughed wildly, thinking, "Hey, that kid actually played tricks in front of me? Now he also knows. How can I be easy to deal with? This is called lifting a rock only to drop it on one's own feet." He laughed wildly for a while, causing the two big teeth in his mouth and the two big horns on his head to tremble. He could only wait to see Long Air leave with his tail between his legs. After all, it was an internal fight between the two brothers, and now that there was no evidence, what did it have to do with his Pitfall Mountain? But it was funny that Long Jio was too smart for his own good, and actually provoked a demon with both wisdom and courage. But the next moment, the laughter and cheers in the cave slowly became sparse. Because that hatred seemed to be a little strange. He killed Long Jio with one palm. Then he looked over here. Hatred, who had revealed his demon body, seemed to have a raging flame burning in his eyes. He stared at the entrance of the Pitfall Mountain in a daze for 2 or 3 breaths, and suddenly let out an earth-shaking roar, "Get out of here!" As soon as his voice fell, hatred turned around and pounced over. It was a kind of terrifying aura like a mountain purgatory. It was the aura of a super big demon that belonged to the realm of profound life. When he moved, it was as if the whole world moved with him. The air around him turned scarlet in an instant, as if the flames in his eyes were burning the very air itself. Hatred left a trail of flames wherever he went. His face was distorted and terrifying in the red-hot mist. His fingertips seemed to be made of freshly forged steel. Before the evil king could react, hatred had already crashed into the restrictive spell of the Pitfall Mountain. The tremors and rumbles this time could not be mentioned in the same breath as the previous 3. At the point of contact, the colorful light instantly dimmed and almost disappeared. Yazi's sharp claws pierced into the barrier in the raging flames. The evil king could almost see that his red and shiny fingertips had broken through the barrier a little. Then, like a wild beast, Yazi tightly clasped the invisible barrier with both of his hands, and then roared at the sky and began to tear the barrier with all his might. Flames rose from his body and soared into the sky. The pillar of fire was like a sharp sword that pierced through the heavens, and it would not stop until it cut through the restrictions of the Pitfall Mountain. The monster kings in the cave were all dumbfounded by the great demon's rage. After a moment of daze, these demons were all scared out of their wits. Like headless flies, they fled in all directions. This was the first time they had witnessed the wrath of the dragon clan. Furthermore, this furious dragon clan was the strongest expert below the Grand Supreme Realm, the vast life mystical realm. They did not have the time to think about why hatred was so furious. They just wanted to find a hole and hide in it so that they would not be implicated. Only the evil king was dumbfounded. Hatred was only 3 steps away from him outside the restrictive spell. He had seen Long Air's face and actions clearly, but he didn't know. Where did Long Air's anger come from? Or in other words, why did he vent all his anger on him? When he said, "Get out here," wasn't that directed at her? This was too much. He raised his eyebrows when he saw the restriction of Pitfall Mountain being torn apart by Yazi, almost tearing a crack in the void. However, hatred's divine power seemed to be limited. He could only tear a small crack and could not expand it. Once he was not careful, the crack would close up. Hatred would fly back and stare at the inside of the cave with his burning eyes. Then he would pounce on the restrictions and tear them apart again. After this happened 3 or 4 times, the evil king was also frightened. At first, he only wanted to wait for hatred to realize that he could not break the restrictions and then leave. But hatred was even more desperate, as if he wanted to die with him. He finally could not stand it anymore and shouted, "Hatred! Don't be so ungrateful. You and I are both in the profound realm, and I have been managing this Pitfall Mountain for thousands of years. Do you really think you can defeat me here?" He was rational. But the 9th young master was not rational. He was a demon that had lived for thousands of years, and was also the king of all demons in the world. He condescended to save a person, a little person that he used to see as food. Then he put down his pride and sincerely wanted to make friends with that person for the first time. In the end, he was tricked to death by that lowly little thing, and his real body was taken away by him in some unknown way. That time was already a great humiliation that made him go crazy just thinking about it. But now, not only did that little thing not know how to repent, it even kept on saying that it was indeed a lie. Moreover, it had once again been tricked by him. Just now, he killed the real body formed by his soul, and his real body was still in the Pitfall Mountain. This was not something that could be described as great humiliation. As a result, the originally impulsive and violent 9th young master had already lost all rationality because of Li Yunxin's meticulously arranged and calculated words. When Evil King's words fell into his ears, they were like the whistling of the wind. How could he understand the meaning behind them? He only thought of one thing: kill him. Kill him. Kill him. The pitiful Evil King thought that he had tricked Li Yunxin, but now he had jumped into his own trap without knowing it. Seeing that hatred did not pay attention to his words, he felt that he had made up his mind to fight to the death with him. He was a 2,000-year-old demon king, a tyrant of a region. Even though he still had some doubts in his heart and felt a little puzzled, how could he lower his voice and reason with this crazy dragon boy at this juncture? He was tearing at his own door. If he tried to reason now, wouldn't the demon kings laugh at him for being a cowardly rat in front of the dragon's son hatred? Therefore the evil king let out a roar, "Little ones, get into formation and tear this long worm apart." The whole Pitfall Mountain shook. 12 hours ago. 12 hours ago, Li Yunxin had just appeared in the desert of the Stone Forest Mountain. In the eyes of the snake spirit Qi Duanjin, he was just a white figure in the scorching air. At that time, Li Shan was still in the hall of the Myrtle Palace in the Lord Dongting Mountain, paying attention to the other Li Yunxin's every move. He was very puzzled as to why this guy was still playing around in such a dangerous situation. At first, when he heard Li Yunxin Lu Lao Dao by Yunxin, and the little servant girl sitting in a circle and saying things like "Lord," "Loyal subject," "Traitor," etc., he thought they were discussing the current situation. But as he played with Mrs. Sanhua and listened carefully, he slowly realized that they were playing a strange game. Li Shan was a demon now, but as Tan Liang, she was not a demon in the past. She used to have many identities, so although her realm wasn't high, she was very knowledgeable. He knew that Li Yunxin was now in the true state. In the true state, it was possible to cultivate the magical power of soul incarnation. But as far as he knew, Li Yunxin had only been in the true state for a month. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to cultivate such a magical power in such a short period of time. But he was knowledgeable after all. What if this person was very perceptive, a genius among geniuses, and really had a 1 in a million chance to cultivate it? Even if he could cultivate it, there were still many restrictions. Li Yunxin was now only in the realm of enlightened immortal, the lowest level of the true state. In this realm, The incarnation of the real body couldn't be more than 30 miles away from the original body. 30 miles. It was 100 miles away from the middle hall of the Ziwei Palace in Mount Jun to the nearest Dongting Lake. Even if he had an incarnation, he still couldn't get out of Dongting. Once he was far away, the real body would return to its original position. Thinking of this, she felt a little relieved. She just continued to watch him carefully. Like this, she stared at him for 6 hours. First, Lu Laodao seemed to be tired, so he proposed to take a break and get some food. However, Li Yunxin seemed to be having fun and didn't hear it at all. Bai Yunxin was also tired of watching, so she said, "Let's go. Let's play another day." After saying that, she stood up. She stood up and her maid followed her. So only Li Yunxin was still murmuring something excitedly. He refused to move, as if he had forgotten himself. He didn't even know that the other three had left the table. Seeing this scene, Li Shan instinctively frowned. Lu Laodao seemed to think of something. He hurriedly blocked Li Yunxin. He said, "Brother XN, let's play another day." Then he helped him up and walked to the side hall. But Li Yunxin followed Lu Laodao and was still talking about the words he just said when they were playing. At this time, Li Shan finally took a deep breath and realized that something was wrong. The Li Yunxin in front of him was not the Li Yunxin he knew before. Rather than calling it a great demon, it would be more accurate to say that it was a puppet with a muddled mind. He immediately broke out in a cold sweat. He quickly found an excuse and said that he needed to leave for a while. That Sanhua was having fun with himself. He didn't know what he was mumbling to himself, so he didn't care about him and just let him be. Li Shan left the main hall first and then hid in the forest like a gust of wind. When he saw that there was no one around, he climbed up the steep rock wall and took a huge risk to go around to the window of the side hall in the middle of the main hall and poked his head out to take a look. He saw the Li Yunxin that was carried into the side hall by Lu Laodao turn into spots of light and dissipate in the air. He heard Lu Laodao sigh. "I'm not good at Taoism. If Brother Xian were to draw, this figure wouldn't disappear even after 2 days." Chapter 266. Li Shan's head is buzzing. It's a dummy? Then, where is the real Li Yunxin? He carefully and slowly retreats from the cliff in case of disturbing Lu Laodao. As soon as he gets to the ground, he immediately flies into the water. He avoids the demons guarding the periphery of Mount Jun and goes to the Sanhiku next to Dongting without stopping. There used to be Egret town near the Sanhiku with smooth roads and convenient transportation. Therefore, his senior fellow apprentice Fu Liangzi, who pretends to be Kun Wuzi, sends someone here to wait for possible news. Now it finally comes in handy. An emptiness realm cultivator is waiting there. He works very seriously. Li Shan sees him when he arrives at the lake. He immediately shouts, "Go back and report that Li Yunxin is missing." The cultivator is confused about why the great master asks him to wait for a message from a demon. But the authority of Kun Wuzi makes him suppress this doubt in his heart. At this moment he doesn't look down on Li Shan. Instead he listens carefully. After hearing that he asked again, "Is that all you have to say?" Only then did Li Shan compose himself. He carefully sized him up and said, "Who else knows that you are here?" The cultivator answers calmly, "My coming here is a secret of the great master. No one knows." Li Shan is relieved. He knows he can talk more with him. He thinks for a while and says, "Report to your great master that Li Yunxin is missing. He has disappeared for about 6 hours. He left a fake body in Dongting and lied to me for 6 hours. I guess he should be going to." The cultivator frowns slightly and raises his hand to interrupt him. "Wait a moment, Taoist friend." Then he takes out a figure from his sleeve and throws it out. The figure soon turns into ashes. Then he looks at Li Shan. It seems to be very serious. "I'll ask the great master to come in person." Li Shan can't help but look at him a few more times. This Taoist has an extraordinary temperament. Therefore he asks, "What's your name?" The Taoist salutes, "Song Yuezi." He doesn't speak anymore. Li Shan also becomes silent. But this silence didn't last long. A stream of light appeared on the horizon, and Kun Wuzi descended from the sky with strong winds, causing Song Yuzi's sleeves to flutter. Seeing that his sect leader had arrived, the Taoist priest bowed again and silently left. Li Shan wasn't in the mood to say anything else and continued, "Up until now, Li Yunxin has already disappeared for 18 hours. He created a fake body on Mount Jun. I don't know if he sensed something was wrong." Kun Wuzi was slightly stunned and then he said, "Soul transformation true body? However, he quickly thought of what Li Shan had thought before and denied his own thoughts. No. He's at the true realm, so his avatar won't be able to go too far and do nothing. Yes. I think I must have left Dongting in person. Didn't you find it? The exit was guarded by a Taoist priest. Let's not talk about this for now. Kuan Wuzi frowned and paced back and forth with an ugly expression. After all, he wasn't the Kuan Wu of the past. He might look exactly the same, but his state of mind and experience were much different. He wasn't a real and calm Shen realm cultivator. After pacing back and forth, he turned around and said, "Could it be that he went to Stone Forest Mountain?" "That's what I speculated too." Li Shan said, "He said something to me before. He probably said that he wanted to ask the big demons to besiege the city of Wei so that you can kill them. Now it seems that he's probably going there. But I don't know if he already suspected me before, and if those words were to deceive me. Now, you have to make a decision." Kuan Wuzi was stunned. "What decision?" Li Shan looked at him and sighed. "Li Yunxin is full of tricks. We don't know what he's going to do. He gave us the element of surprise and we'll give him the element of surprise. We can only make plans after the situation is messed up. In my opinion, no matter what he does at Stone Forest Mountain, we have to make him fail." "You said that Kuan Wuzi saw long hair and hatred seemed to have a grudge against him?" Kuan Wuzi thought for a while and his eyes brightened. "Yes. Tell that hatred that Li Yunxin is at Stone Forest Mountain. No matter what grudge they have, that Shen realm big demon will cause trouble if he goes there. This is easy. We set up a big tactical formation to find the remnant soul of Kuan Wuzi. Although we didn't find him, we found the trace of hatred. I will send someone to inform him later." "There's another point," Li Shan said to Kuan Wuzi through the inhibition of Dongting. "We have to catch all the people in Dongting. We used to think that Li Yunxin is a cruel and merciless demon. He can use anyone and abandon anyone. But according to my observations over the past few days, he still has feelings for me. Let's not talk about others. Just look at Lu Laodao Hunyuanzi, he values that old man very much. He is like a servant and a friend. And the few demons under his command are also loyal to him. I think he can't let them go. Catch them all and take them as hostages. If things change again, there will still be room for negotiation." Kuan Wuzi listened to Li Shan saying so much in one breath and his face was a bit dull. After a while he sighed, "What on earth have you been through these years? You are not the same person as before. You have become so decisive and fierce." Li Shan pursed his lips and wanted to say something but stopped. But soon he smiled. "It's not a good time to be sad. We have to act quickly. I am now at the peak of the transcendent state. These days I have been leading the demons in the lake and I have a summer palace. Although it is not stable, it can be used. When Li Yunxin took me out of Dongting, I set the exit outside. You can come to Dongting from outside through my summer palace. Now there is only one big demon in the lake by Yunxin. If you come, it will be safe." Kuan Wuzi was stunned and then he frowned. "Are you crazy? Although I am in the true state, my body is even stronger than that of the Shen state. With my cultivation, if I borrow the way from your summer palace to enter Dongting, the Reiki in my body will definitely attack your inner palace. How can the Reiki in your body contain my Reiki? It will seriously injure you. Maybe you will die." Li Shan stared at Kuan Wuzi for a while and suddenly sneered, "Senior brother, these years have you been living too comfortably?" Kuan Wuzi was stunned and he made a sound of confusion. Then he heard Li Shan's voice become cold and fierce. "Do you know what kind of situation we are in now? You have all kinds of treasures in Daotong and stand aloof from worldly affairs. But do you know how demons live? This is Dongting, not Yunshan. Li Yunxin is a sinister and cunning demon, and he is not a Shenmen cultivator. When you were in Yunshan, you felt that everything was under your control and you could slowly plan. But now, these days the more I spend time with Li Yunxin the more shocked I am. We underestimated him. If he really goes to Stone Forest Mountain now, it is very likely that he will bring back 1/3 of the demons in Qing Kingdom to attack the city of Wei. You only know that he has been quietly hiding in Dongting for so long. How do you know that he has not already made a plan and is only waiting to kill us? Now the situation is completely out of control. We are going to start the final battle. The final battle. Either you die or I die. Have you forgotten how Ling Kongzi and Yunzi died? Did they still feel that everything was under their control even at the moment of their death?" Kuan Wuzi was rendered speechless by his torrential interrogation. After a long time he sighed in a low voice, "Okay. Junior brother, you are right." After a moment of silence he said in a low voice, "But don't hurt her. Li Shan was slightly stunned and then immediately laughed. His tone suddenly became calm and he stared at Kun Wuzi. Okay. I know. She that Ling Kongzi. She stared at Kun Wuzi for a while and said slowly, if we really find her, I will spare her life for you. Now, gather your people, the people of Daotong and the spies of our Freemasonry around here. Ask them to move. Everyone move. Okay. Kun Wuzi said in a low voice, I will go back to the city of Wei to arrange something. After that, I will borrow your temporary imperial residence to enter Dongting. Li Shan looked at him, go quickly. Therefore, for hours later, an emptiness realm cultivator found hatred. At this moment, hatred was still hatred. He didn't want to cause more trouble. He was entrusted by the divine dragon and had his own wishes. For a long time, he wandered around Dongting and the city of Wei and watched the development of the situation. Therefore, he was quite surprised by the arrival of the Daotong cultivator. The messenger of Daotong told him that Li Yunxin is now in the Pitfall Mountain. At this time, this news was no longer a speculation. A spy like Tan Liangzhu, who was now among the demons in the Pitfall Mountain, was activated and quickly sent back information to confirm Li Shan's speculation. But the strange thing was that hatred didn't seem to be interested in it. At this time he was lying on a big green stone in the forest and basking in the sun. He lazily stared at the Taoist priest who called himself Song Yuezi, and yawned, but what does it have to do with me? Song Yuezi was slightly stunned. According to the words of the great hierarch, hatred should have gone to the Pitfall Mountain immediately after knowing the news. He might even vent his anger on him because Kun Wuzi had ambushed him before. That was a deep hatred. Therefore this mission was extremely risky, and he could be killed by a moody demon in anger. But looking at Yazi now, it was indeed not the expected reaction at all. Song Yuezi suspected that he had leaked some information. Therefore he stood under the big green stone and thought for a while. He said, that Li Yunxin. It is said that he had a disagreement with the Lord Tongtian near Dongting. Now we got the news. Hatred stood up slightly and looked at him condescendingly and strangely. Disagreement? Li Yunxin? You mean my ninth brother who calls himself Li Yunxin? He is my ninth brother and also the dragon's. Where did the disagreement come from? You Taoist priest? The big demon narrowed his eyes dangerously. Are you here to make fun of me? No wonder you are not afraid of me at all. You are up to no good? Song Yuezi was more and more confused. He felt that things were completely out of his control. He looked up to the west. The sun was about to set. Chapter 267. When the head priest ordered him to do this, he said it was extremely urgent. But the current situation, he couldn't do it? He frowned. I am also a cultivator, not like those ignorant mortals. It was true that Lord of Tongtian was famous in the world, but if he was timid in front of Lord of Tongtian, it would be rude. But, is the Lord Tongtian testing I? That's not necessary. This news is absolutely true. The Lord Tongtian will know when he goes to the Pitfall Mountain. Hatred didn't look at him anymore. He yawned lazily and lay back on the rock. Get lost. Song Yunzi wanted to say more, but Hatred waved his hand as if he was shooing away a fly. He didn't see any strange phenomenon, but Song Yunzi suddenly felt a fierce blow to his chest, as if a small mountain was crushing down on him in an instant. He was greatly shocked and immediately circulated the spiritual energy in his body to protect himself. However, the full power of an emptiness realm cultivator was like dust in front of the casual attack of a profound realm great demon. In just one breath, Song Yunzi finally couldn't resist anymore. He spat out a mouthful of blood and lost consciousness. The sun finally set. When he woke up again, it was because of intense pain. It was as if his body was being torn apart by some kind of power, and his flesh was being torn off piece by piece. The pain spread from his arm to every corner of his body. Even in his coma, he couldn't help but let out a shrill scream. He suddenly opened his eyes and sat up. Then he realized, that wasn't an illusion or a dream. One of his arms was held in Hatred's hand. The sky was dark, but the forest was silent. Even the mosquitoes didn't dare to buzz. There was a bonfire under the rock, but the fire could only light up a small area. The surrounding area was filled with the shadows of the trees, as if they were ghosts. But now, the arm he was holding was dripping with blood. His forearm was almost to the bone. It was not a cut or a bruise, but it was cut by Dragon Sun's hatred with his sharp nails, and then tore off his muscles with 2 fingers. Song Yuzi was stunned. Although the pain was still intense, he had regained consciousness. It was also because he regained consciousness that he realized he was being eaten. He was eaten alive. Hatred's face was right in front of her. His eyes shone brightly in the flickering firelight. There were still traces of blood at the corner of his mouth, and he was chewing slowly, as if he was eating some dried fruit while looking at himself calmly. The devoured cultivator and the devoured demon stared at each other for a while. Then Song Yuzi clenched his teeth and widened his eyes. Because while Hatred was staring at him calmly, he tore off another piece of muscle. Song Yuzi clearly heard the sound of his flesh being torn off his arm by the demon. It was the first time he knew. It sounded like tearing cloth. The demon raised his head slightly and put the bloody flesh in his hand into his mouth, but his eyes were fixed on Song Yuzi the whole time. After watching for a while and swallowing the mouthful, he laughed. Cultivators really do have to taste better. It's chewy, not like the rotten meat of mortals. But if you don't scream now, you'll be choking your breath in your lungs, and it will sour my delicious food. Sweat oozed from Yunzi's forehead like rain, soaking his hair and clothes. But the demon's hand seemed to be made of steel. It held him firmly. The emptiness realm Taoist didn't dare to act rashly. He could only grit his teeth and bear the pain. He widened his eyes. Why did Lord Tongtian eat me? Then Song Yuzi found that Hatred was stunned. Although it was only for a short moment, he knew that his eyes wouldn't lie to him. It was as if his words had evoked the past in the demon's heart. His hand and expression froze together. Then the demon suddenly narrowed his eyes and stared at him carefully for a while, saying, "You are interesting." He stopped. He didn't want to eat him for the time being. Song Yuzi didn't know why his words had such an effect. He just wanted to be tough and calm to buy some time for himself. But since it was effective, he clenched his teeth again and didn't look at the terrible wound on his arm. "I'm here to send a message to Lord Tongtian. When two countries fight, they don't kill envoys. If Lord Tongtian kills me today..." But he was surprised to find that Hatred suddenly frowned with a puzzled look. "What message?" Song Yuzi was stunned. He didn't know if this temperamental demon was making fun of him. But he still forced himself to be spirited, pretending that he had never spoken to Yizi before, and repeated Yizi's words word for word. Then he found that Lord Tongtian was absent-minded again. He was staring at him, but obviously his mind was not on him. It was as if the demon had passed through his body and seen far away in things that happened a long time ago. After a while, the demon's focus returned to Song Yuzi. The demon grinned, showing his sharp teeth. "Li Yunxin, yes." Song Yuzi gritted his teeth and tried to calm himself down. Because he found that Hatred liked this kind of calmness in the face of danger. "Since Lord Tongtian has received the message, how about letting me go? I've entertained you with flesh and blood. Now it's time to go back and report." But Hatred didn't let him go. He smiled again. Interesting. I've seen such an interesting little guy before, and I've seen the second one tonight." Hearing this, Song Yuzi was delighted. He knew that things might work out. So he became calmer and even tried to force himself to treat Hatred as a friend. "Since you're interesting, why not make friends? Lord Tongtian usually..." His words came to an abrupt end. At the moment when he heard the word friend, Hatred's eyes suddenly burst with a terrible light. She pulled Song Yuzi in front of her and bit his neck. The Taoist's cervical vertebrae were immediately bitten off, and his breath was instantly cut off. Blood gushed out from the neck and splashed all over Hatred's face, but he didn't care. Instead, he shook his head fiercely like a real beast and bit the Taoist's neck until it was completely bitten off. The Taoist's head rolled on the ground. Then he threw the headless body next to the bonfire and gritted his teeth. "Friend? Bah! You don't deserve it." Then he soared into the sky and flew towards the direction of Pitfall Mountain. After the meeting between Li Shan and Kun Wuzi, and before Song Yuzi found Hatred, there were some other disturbances beside Dongting Lake. It didn't refer to the shore of the lake, but the surroundings of Dongting. The cause of the incident started from the Su family in Su Town, the Su Town where Su Weng used to live. The head of the family, Su Zhizhang, and the key figures of the family took a gaily painted boat to Dongting to celebrate his father Su Weng's birthday. However, the boat was caught in a storm. Then the Dongting was blocked by some invisible force and no one could get in or out. Everyone knew that this was a dangerous business, but after all, the head of the family still had some power, so it was peaceful for a few days. But after half a month, they couldn't hold back anymore. The Su family was originally a business with a huge amount of wealth. But in such an era, if one didn't have power, then the more wealth he had, the more dangerous it would be. The Su family was different from the Yu family. The Yu family didn't have many descendants and they got rich late. Even though they had a big family, they really had no foundation. However, the Su family had been building power for a long time, in a covert way. The descendants of the Su family went to school, but they didn't take the imperial examinations. They read classics and history since childhood, and they also learned the way of business and life. When there was a chance, they would go out to be an advisor. The officials of the Qing kingdom always worked in different places. The officials had no foundation when they came to a foreign place. Without the support of the local powerful families, it was difficult for them to do anything. And the Su family was naturally a first-class power in the states and prefectures near Dongting. With smooth connections and rich family property, it was possible for the descendants of the Su family to curry favor in the officialdom. Moreover, they did have enough talent to handle many things behind the scenes. Therefore, in the states and prefectures near Dongting, advisor of the Su family, was a famous signboard. The ignorant people of the Qing kingdom liked to say, the Daqing state belongs to the Zhao family. And some people near Dongting also said that the 4 states and 16 prefectures belonged to the Su family. Now such a big family lost its leader, naturally there would be many people fighting for it. Half a month after Su Zizhang disappeared, the drama of fighting for power and profit took place in the mansion, making this first-class rich and powerful family restless. There was no peace for a day. Nearby officials with a little ambition were happy to see the chaos. A strong and powerful Su family would make it convenient for them to do things, but no one liked to be controlled by an invisible force and lose freedom. With such complicated and contradictory thoughts, they watched the joke for more than a month. But one day they were surprised to find that all the disputes disappeared. The Su family seemed to have elected a new patriarch in a single night. What was strange was that the new head of the family was a son of a concubine named Su Ziyuan, who was not very popular one day ago. No one knew how such a young man became the head of the family. Some curious people went to inquire, but they couldn't find out anything. Some officials had advisors who were members of the Su family, so they beat around the bush to ask their advisor's opinion. Although the answers they got were expressed in different ways, the general meaning was the same. They had no objection to it. These people from the Su family were truly monsters. No wonder they could be powerful for 200 years. But the strange thing didn't end there. Soon, people learned of another thing. The young man named Su Ziyuan claimed that he was the former head of the Su family, Su Zizhang, who disappeared in Dongting Lake more than a month ago. Chapter 268. When the news came out, it was at night. On this night, far, far away in a place called Pitfall Mountain, 2 powerful fiendish demons were fighting. But how could the ignorant people know that this has anything to do with the Pitfall Mountain, the city of Wei, and the Dongting Lake? They only knew that the new head of the family, Su Ziyuan, suddenly fainted that night. It was said that he was in a coma for 4 hours. Then he sat up straight on the bed in everyone's eyes. But his spirit and temperament were completely different. He looked at the people around him coldly with a straight face and then shouted, "Where are the others?" At that time there were only 2 doctors, 4 maids and 3 manservants around him. This new head of the family didn't have enough authority to convince the public. It was said that the reason why he could get this position was the result of some people in the family weighing the pros and cons. They thought that if the Su family continued to fight like this, it would be better to elect a puppet and let everyone discuss everything. Thus, this puppet was suffering from an acute illness. Why would it be in a hurry? But then things became different. Su Ziyuan, whose temperament and tone changed, claimed that he was Su Zizhang. At first, everyone thought he was having a fit, but Su Ziyuan soon revealed a lot of secrets that only Su Zizhang knew. Only then did the people panic. All the housekeepers of the nearby families rushed to Su Ziyuan's place overnight to ask questions. Not only did Su Ziyuan clearly explain Su Zizhang's habits and hobbies, he even picked out the important internal secrets of the family and the various arrangements. There were many things that even the stewards of the various branches didn't know about. After 4 hours, people finally believed that the Su Ziyuan in front of them was Su Zizhang. As for why it was like this, Su Zizhang told him a mystical story. The Su family and people in the nearby state knew the rumor that Su San, the ancestor of the Su family, made a fortune. It was said that Su San was fishing in Dongting Lake. He cast a net and caught a rusty copper bottle. He opened the copper bottle, and a water god floated out from the bottle. The water god called himself the 10th young master and was the descendant of the divine dragon. When he went to the heaven with the dragon, he secretly ate the steamed bun made by the Queen of Heaven for the heaven sovereign. Therefore he was sealed in that bottle and thrown into Dongting. Long Sun thanked Su San for saving him, so he wanted to fulfill his 3 wishes. Su San was not a greedy person. His first wish was for the Daqing state to be fair, prosperous, civilized, and harmonious. His second wish was for the people of the Qin kingdom to be patriotic, dedicated, honest, and friendly. His third wish was his own. He hoped to get some money so that he could get a wife. The 10th young master of the water god felt that Su San was a very good person, so he gave him a lot of money and treasures. Thus the Su clan became prosperous. Everyone knew about this rumor, but they just treated it as a rumor. But now Su Zhizhang, who had possessed Su Ziyuan, said that he had seen the 10th young master again. According to him, the pleasure boat encountered a huge storm that day, and the boat capsized. He fell into the water and lost consciousness. Nobody knew where he had drifted to. Then he was suddenly awakened by someone. When he opened his eyes, he saw a solemn and dignified deity lifting him up and placing him on the shore. This deity claimed to be the descendant of the 10th young master of the lake water god and the dragon god. He said that he had once had a close relationship with Su Zhizhang's ancestor. There had been a storm in the lake, so he was patrolling the lake and happened to see him fall into the water. He then asked Su Zhizhang and found out that he was the descendant of Su San. Thus, he did not hesitate to violate the laws of heaven to save Su Zhizhang. However, Su Zhizhang's body was already completely destroyed, and his soul could not return. Thus, the water god invited Black Bai Yanjun. Black Bai Yanjun took out the Book of Life and Death to look. It said that the Su family had a person called Su Ziyuan. In his previous life he was an evil person, so his life was short in this life. However, the karma of this life was over and he was about to die. Coincidentally, he could make a body for Su Zhizhang. Naturally, Su Zhizhang did everything he could to refuse, but the water god would not listen to him. So, he begged Black Bai Yanjun to extend Su Zhizhang's life. The Yama king could not bear the water god's kindness, so he took Su Zhizhang's soul back and threw it into Su Ziyuan's body. However, this time, the water god had overstepped his duty and interfered with life and death. Therefore, according to the laws of heaven, he would be tied to the immortal beheading platform and struck to death by lightning. However, Black Bai Yanjun said that the 10th young master was returning a favor from the past, and there was a reason for it. Therefore, if many people in the lower realm could pray for the 10th young master and offer incense, once the celestial emperor was touched, the 10th young master might be able to escape the calamity. Su Zhizhang, who possessed Su Ziyuan, told such a strange story which was hard to believe. However, if he believed that Su Ziyuan's body was really Su Zhizhang, what did it matter if he believed it or not? Therefore, the Su family spread the news overnight, and there was no lack of even more bizarre processing. When the heavens were about to light up, everyone in Su town knew about it. The Su family seemed to really want to repay the kindness of the 10th young master of the water god. Not only did the people of Su town know, but they also sent many servants to all directions to tell everyone they met. The villagers who were not knowledgeable might think that old Master Su really wants to repay the kindness. However, the more knowledgeable people, such as the officials in the government, saw something else. Let's not talk about whether this Su Zhizhang was real or not. Even if it was fake, it seemed that the infighting had indeed stopped after the Su family released such news. The ignorant commoners only saw miraculous things, but they saw deeper. The Su family used this method to announce that the family's power structure had stabilized, and now they spread the news in all directions, in order to dispel those who had ulterior motives and were plotting against them. The news itself was absurd, but this was probably because the Su family only wanted to convey an attitude. Since the situation had stabilized, the officials could no longer watch the show. In addition, the advisors by their side had indeed told them some truths that made these old masters unhappy, but were indeed very useful. For example, the officials of the state government usually received a lot of benefits from the Su family. But a few days ago, when the Su family suffered a great disaster, they didn't help them. Instead, they allowed all kinds of evil people to mess up the situation. If it were an ordinary aristocratic family, the masters wouldn't have cared about their thoughts. However, the Su family was a first-class tyrant, and it wasn't as if there had never been a precedent of disobedient local officials being pushed out openly or secretly. It was not a wise move to offend such a family. Therefore, they had to do something to show their attitude. For example, if the Su family wanted to mobilize those ignorant villagers to pray and protect, they would not care about it. Some people accepted this suggestion, but some did not want to buy it. However, those who did not want to buy it soon found that things were not under their control, When dawn came, many people swore that they had received the 10th young master of the water god in their dreams last night. They said that he had saved Su Zizhang and was being punished by thunder, hoping that they could worship and pray for him. After all, he would protect one side in the future and give them a lot of good karma. These people were distributed in all directions, and there were nearly 100 of them. They were not the Su family in the courtyard with high walls, but the villagers who seemed to have nothing to do with the Su family. This method might seem childish and laughable to some people, but, in the short period of a few hours from the night before yesterday to the morning of the next day, indeed, a lot of people were stirred up. It was not only because of the strange things in the Su family, and some people did dream of the god, but also because the Su family said that anyone who was willing to pray for the 10th young master of the water god would be given one tael of silver. There were more than 2 million people in 4 states and 16 prefectures. How many families were there? The Su family was throwing away money like this. It was as if they were going to lose all of their wealth. At this time, even the most rational people had to try to believe that it was indeed because Su Zizhang piously wanted to repay the kindness. Therefore, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people's power of faith began to gather in Dongting Lake because of this terrible, desperate and powerful mobilization ability on the body of 10th young master Li Shan. At this moment, Li Shan was somewhere by Dongting Lake. He didn't dare to return to Mount June. But if they already suspected him, it didn't matter now, the raid would be launched soon. Moreover, he had also received information from the spy in the Pitfall Mountain. Li Yunxin was killed by hatred. It was a shocking and unbelievable news. Both Li Shan and Kunwu couldn't believe it. The leader of Lengya Cave abode, the real Kunwu who was stronger than Li Yunxin, suddenly died. But that was the result of Fu Liangzi's secret operation and arrangement. In fact, it could be said that he had been preparing for 46 years, since the day he lurked in the orthodoxy. But the thing about Li Yunxin, he went to Pitfall Mountain by himself. Even with the help of the two of them, hatred of Dragon's Son also went. But Li Yunxin was a sinister and cunning person. Would he really die like this? Therefore, Li Shan and Kunwu met again and came to a conclusion that was hard for them to accept. That Li Yunxin probably cultivated his soul into the real body. He went to Pitfall Mountain with his real body, and then his real body was killed. But this also meant that Li Yunxin's real body was not in Dongting Lake. The real body of a cultivator at the level of enlightened master must not be more than 30 miles away from the real body. If Li Yunxin's doppelganger went to Pitfall Mountain, then the real body must be within 30 miles of Pitfall Mountain. This was a conservative deduction made by someone who didn't want to believe that Li Yunxin really died like this. Then, the plan should continue. If Li Yunxin died, it would be safe. But it was a pity that they couldn't capture him and interrogate him about some things. If Li Yunxin didn't die and only his doppelganger was killed, then things would be even smoother. If the real body was killed, the real body would be greatly injured and his personal ability would plummet. Even if Li Yunxin was still in the real state, he would be a very weak one. If they captured the people in Dongting Lake, he would never be able to do anything. Therefore, at this moment, Li Shan stood on the surface of Dongting Lake, carefully feeling the strange pleasure of the countless weak power of faith gathering into his body. He was at the peak of the transcendent state. Now, he felt that he was going to become the second real state in this lake. After waiting for so many years, this day finally came. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.